Chosen one, stop for a moment. Do not move past this message yet. Something changed in you recently, and you may have treated it as small, ordinary, almost too quiet to matter. But heaven did not measure that moment the way you did. What looked like almost nothing on earth carried the weight of a completed season in the unseen realm. There was a point, perhaps only a few days ago, when the old version of you expected you to respond the way you always had. The pressure was familiar. The emotional pull was familiar. Even the thoughts moving through your mind felt familiar. Yet something in you was no longer willing to return to the same place. And that is where this message begins. I am not here to tell you that every problem around you has disappeared. You can still see unfinished conversations, unanswered questions, and doors that have not visibly opened yet. You can still feel the tiredness of carrying more than most people ever knew you were carrying. But beneath all of that, there is a quiet difference now. You are not standing in the same inner place you were standing in before. For a long time, you thought victory would arrive with noise. You thought there would be some dramatic sign, some public confirmation, some visible reversal that would finally prove your season had changed. But the first evidence did not happen around you. It happened within you, so quietly that you nearly missed it. Hold this close. Heaven often announces completion in a language the world does not recognize. The world waits for applause, explanations, and visible outcomes. God watches what happens in the hidden place, where nobody is clapping and nobody knows what it cost you to remain steady. What happened there is connected to the reason these words are reaching you now. You feel deeply. You notice the shift in a room before other people speak. You sense when a conversation changes before the words reveal it. You have carried the atmosphere of places that never understood how much you were absorbing. That sensitivity once made you question yourself, but a watchman is trained by what others overlook. What once felt like exposure has also been teaching you discernment. You learned what it feels like to be misunderstood while trying to do the right thing. People saw your distance and assumed coldness. They saw your silence and assumed defeat. They saw you stop explaining and thought you had nothing left to say. But there are seasons when silence is not surrender. It is the sound of a soul refusing to spend sacred strength on a battle that no longer deserves access to it. Some people only recognize the version of you that was easiest for them to predict. They knew how to reach you through guilt, urgency, old memories, or the fear of being misread. When those doors began closing, they did not know what to do with the quiet that replaced them. You felt that shift, even if nobody named it. And here is the first clue. The thing heaven is celebrating is not the thing most people would point to if they looked at your life from the outside. It is hidden inside a moment you almost dismissed. Before this message is finished, you will understand why that moment carried more weight than many of the battles that exhausted you. For months, maybe longer, you were being trained in a strange kind of strength. Not the strength that shouts, not the strength that needs to win every argument, not the strength that proves itself by forcing a door. The strength being formed in you was quieter, and because it was quieter, you did not always recognize it as strength. A spiritual warrior eventually learns that not every invitation deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding requires a defense. Not every person who demands access has the authority to enter the next season. What felt like exhaustion was also exposing where your energy had been leaking into cycles that could never become your future. That is why certain relationships began to feel different. Conversations that once pulled you in for hours started sounding empty. Patterns you once excused became impossible to ignore. You began noticing how often you abandoned your own peace just to keep another person comfortable. And somewhere in that process, your inner standard changed. Do not rush past that. Your inner standard changed. When the standard changes, the same old bait can still appear, but it no longer speaks to the same person. The outside situation may look familiar, while the person standing inside it has become unfamiliar to the old cycle. Because there is less drama, you may think nothing is happening, but listen carefully. There are moments when the absence of your old reaction is the loudest evidence that heaven has completed something in you. I am not naming that moment yet, because you need to see the pattern around it before you can understand its full weight. Think back over the recent days without forcing an answer. There was a situation that touched an old nerve. It may have come through a message, a memory, a familiar tone, a person, or a sudden pressure to return to a role you had already outgrown. Your first impulse may have been familiar, but then something shifted. Maybe nobody around you noticed. Maybe you did not even congratulate yourself. You simply moved differently. The moments that close the deepest cycles rarely arrive with a trumpet. They arrive as a choice that feels almost too simple to be historic. Yet, heaven recognizes what generations repeat. Heaven recognizes what families normalize. Heaven recognizes the invisible agreements that pass from one season to another until somebody finally stops carrying them forward. That is why a cycle breaker is not simply someone who speaks differently. It is someone who no longer needs the old pattern in order to feel secure. You have been doing more of this than you realize. Every time you chose peace over proving, clarity over confusion, and sacred distance over familiar chaos, you were changing your inner architecture. You were learning that love does not require self-abandonment, and that compassion does not require permanent access. But it was not failure, it was separation. It was clearing. It was learning what belongs in your hands and what must remain outside them. A watchman cannot guard what is sacred while leaving every gate open. Now hold this, because we are approaching the next clue. The thing you finally did was connected to this new standard, but it was not simply setting a boundary, walking away, or saying no. Those are only the visible forms. The deeper act happened beneath the action, and that is the part heaven was watching. You are being brought toward that distinction because it explains why your recent choice mattered so much. You were not merely changing behavior. Something that once held authority over your emotional world began losing its claim, and you may not have realized that this was the shift heaven had been waiting to see. This is where your story becomes larger than one relationship, one conflict, or one disappointing season. Cycle breakers do not only deal with the problem in front of them, they interrupt the pattern underneath the problem. They stop giving the same wound a new name and building another chapter on top of it. That interruption can be deeply quiet. It can happen while your phone is in your hand and you choose not to return to an old emotional rhythm. It can happen while you listen to someone speak and realize you do not need their agreement to remain at peace. And when it happens, the person outside may see nothing at all, but heaven sees the invisible part of obedience. Heaven sees the second before the action, where the old pattern makes its final request. Heaven sees the place where you could have gone back and did not. That hidden second is closer to the center of this message than you know. There is a reason I am not giving you the answer too early. If I named the moment now, your mind could reduce it to a single event and move on. But this was not merely an event. It was the visible edge of a deeper transformation that has been forming through every season when you felt delayed, unseen, and stretched beyond the version of yourself you used to know. So stay with the pattern. Notice how often you were pushed to explain yourself. Notice how often you felt responsible for another person's emotional state. Notice how often peace seemed to require your sacrifice. Then notice what has begun to change. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming clean in your motives. It is about giving from love instead of fear, speaking from clarity instead of panic, and remaining silent when words would only pull you back into a cycle God has already shown you how to leave. That kind of maturity does not need an audience. And that is why the celebration over you is not premature. Your circumstances may still be catching up with what has already changed inside you. The people around you may still be responding to an older version of your identity. Some doors may still look closed. But the inner person who used to wait in front of those doors has already begun to disappear. Before we move deeper, remember this. There is a specific moment behind this message, and when you recognize it later, you will understand why the words "you finally did it" carry such weight. You will see why heaven celebrated before the world had anything to applaud. And you will see why the next season could not begin until that hidden choice became real. For now, do not force the answer. Let the recent days pass through your mind gently. Notice where you surprised yourself. Notice where the old reaction waited for you and did not receive the version of you it expected. Somewhere inside that space is the first evidence that the cycle has already begun to break. Chosen one. What comes next is not about convincing you that you are special. It is about showing you what your recent transformation has already proven. You have crossed an inner threshold that cannot be measured by noise, applause, or outward speed. And once you understand what actually changed, you will never look at that quiet moment the same way again. Chosen one. The quiet after your recent decision may have confused you. You expected victory to feel louder than this, but the room looks the same. The responsibilities are still there, and some answers have not arrived. Yet something important has changed. The situation still knows your name, but it no longer knows how to control your response. That is the first evidence most people overlook. They think transformation must immediately produce a visible reward, an open door, a changed relationship, or a sudden reversal. But sometimes the earliest proof is subtraction. A reaction disappears, a compulsion weakens, a pattern reaches for you and receives silence instead of agreement. You may still see unfinished circumstances around you. That does not mean the inner shift was imaginary. If applause had come first, you might have confused approval with healing. If the door had opened first, you might have confused access with readiness. But when you become different, before anything outside rewards you, your peace is no longer being rented from circumstance. This is where the identity of the cycle breaker becomes real. A cycle breaker is not proven by a declaration made in a peaceful room. The proof arrives when an old invitation returns wearing a familiar face and the old script is no longer performed. You do not need to announce that the cycle has changed. The cycle discovers it when it reaches for the person it used to control and finds someone new standing there. Think about how often you used to override your own knowing because you did not want to disappoint someone. You could feel tension after certain conversations, yet still convince yourself to stay available. You could sense that something was draining you, yet call the draining loyalty. For a long time, you were learning the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. There is also a difference between sensitivity and discernment. Sensitivity feels what is happening. Discernment decides what deserves a response. Sensitivity notices the atmosphere. Discernment refuses to let every atmosphere become an instruction. You were never being prepared to feel less. You were being prepared to stop surrendering your direction to everything you feel. That is why the last season became so tiring. Another person's fear could follow you home. A tense room could stay in your body long after you left it. A delayed reply could become an entire story in your mind. The exhaustion was not proof that you were weak. It was evidence that too many gates had been left open. But now something is changing. You are learning that not every person's urgency is your emergency. Not every silence means you did something wrong. Not every closed door is asking you to knock harder. And not every uncomfortable feeling is a command to return to what God has already taught you to release. This is the evidence mismatch I want you to remember. The outside may not yet look victorious, but the pattern underneath is already losing power. You may still be waiting for the public proof while standing inside the private proof. Heaven can recognize completion before the world has anything to applaud, and there is a second clue hidden inside that change. When you stop feeding an old emotional cycle, you recover something you did not realize. The cycle was consuming. You recover attention. You recover mental space. A closed gate does not only keep confusion out, it allows you to hear what was already inside. I want you to hold something here before we continue. Researchers studying how the human brain coordinates attention, creativity, pattern recognition, and integrated thinking have asked what happens when systems designed to work together stop communicating as efficiently as they once did, and what happens when that cooperation begins to return. There is a practical finding behind that question that connects with what spiritually sensitive people describe as fog, scattered focus, and lost clarity. I will return to it later. For now, hold this question. What if part of what you thought you lost was never gone, but simply became harder to access? Do not answer that yet. The point is not to replace prayer, discernment, or obedience with a technique. The point is to separate faith from capacity. Faith can be sincere while attention is exhausted. A direction can be real while the mind receiving it is carrying too much noise to recognize it cleanly. You may know that feeling more intimately than you admit. You begin one task, and 3 other thoughts arrive. You enter a room and forget why you came. You read the same line twice because your eyes moved forward while your attention stayed behind. Then you judge yourself for becoming less sharp, less disciplined, or less capable. But what if that judgment is aimed at the wrong problem? What if the version of you that once learned quickly, connected ideas naturally, and saw patterns before others did, has not disappeared? What if years of stress, overstimulation, divided attention, and emotional vigilance simply made that capacity harder to reach? That is the question I want left open, because before we answer it, you need to understand why your recent spiritual victory matters to it. Clarity is difficult to sustain when part of your attention is always monitoring whether someone is disappointed with you. Focus becomes expensive when your mind is rehearsing conversations that never need to happen. Discernment gets noisy when every inner signal must compete with guilt, memory, fear, and the pressure to keep everybody comfortable. Every time you refuse to abandon your peace just to preserve an old pattern, you reclaim attention. Every time you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim mental space. Every time you let another adult carry the weight of their own emotions, you reclaim energy that used to disappear into endless management. That is not selfishness, it is clearing. Clearing can feel strange at first. If you lived around emotional intensity for a long time, peace can feel empty. If uncertainty once kept you alert, calm can feel suspicious. If struggle once made you feel useful, ease can make you wonder whether you are doing enough. The absence of chaos can feel unfamiliar before it starts to feel safe. This is where detachment begins. Detachment is not hatred, bitterness, or emotional coldness. It means you can see a pattern without automatically entering it. You can care without being consumed. You can listen without surrendering your center, and you can bless someone without volunteering to repeat the wound. And that changes what you are able to receive. Not because suffering earns a reward, and not because pain makes you more worthy. It changes reception because the version of you entering the next season is less likely to trade a real gift for familiar approval. You are becoming able to recognize what belongs to you without immediately asking whether everybody else is comfortable with it. Accelerated fulfillment is not only about something arriving faster. Sometimes it is about less internal resistance when the right thing arrives. A clear decision takes less time. A healthy connection does not need to be chased. The outer movement can accelerate because the inner argument is finally becoming quieter. And this is where generational legacy begins. The cycle is not broken only because you leave one difficult situation. It is broken when the pattern stops reproducing through you. Someone after you may learn that love does not require self-abandonment because you learned it first. Someone after you may inherit permission to choose peace without apologizing for it. The old pattern may still test the gate. A familiar person may return with familiar language. A memory may rise at the exact moment you feel strongest. But a test returning does not mean the lesson failed. Sometimes it is how you discover that the lesson has finally become part of you. Soon, we are going to look directly at the moment when that old agreement lost its authority. I am still not naming it yet. If I give you the answer too early, your mind may reduce it to one event and miss the deeper transformation underneath it. You need to see the shape of the pattern before you can understand why one quiet response carried so much weight. And the question about your lost clarity must remain open a little longer too. There is a reason I introduced it here instead of resolving it immediately. The answer only becomes useful after you understand the full shape of what has been exhausting the receiver. Before restoration makes sense, overload has to become visible. For you, overload was never only information. It was scanning rooms, anticipating conflict, managing reactions, replaying conversations, and searching for the perfect words that might prevent somebody else from becoming upset. It was attention divided into so many directions that stillness itself began to feel unnatural. That vigilance may once have helped you survive, but it is not meant to become a permanent identity. A watchman needs awareness, but a watchman also needs gates. You do not have to absorb everything you perceive, solve every emotional equation, or carry every possible outcome to its conclusion. Notice, discern, choose, release. That rhythm is not making you less caring. It is making your care more intentional. Now, carry two questions into what comes next. What old reaction recently reached for you and failed to receive the response it expected? And what if the mental clarity you thought you lost is not gone, but waiting beneath the noise that old pattern kept producing? One question leads toward the hidden victory heaven celebrated. The other leads toward a practical explanation that will return when you are ready to understand what it solves. The next movement will bring those two lines closer together. You are going to see why your victory was not only about what you refused to repeat, but about what that refusal made room for. And once that becomes clear, the silence around your life will stop looking like emptiness. It will begin to look like preparation. Chosen one, I want to return to the question I asked you to carry with you. What if the clarity you thought you lost was not gone, but buried beneath years of divided attention, emotional vigilance, and patterns that kept your inner world permanently occupied? That question is no longer standing at the edge of this message. We are beginning to move toward its answer now. There is a reason I did not answer it the moment I asked it. An answer means very little when you have not yet seen the full shape of what it is answering. You first needed to recognize how much of your strength was being spent maintaining old emotional agreements. Now the shape is becoming visible. You learned to believe that keeping peace meant keeping everyone comfortable. You learned to read faces, tones, pauses, and silences, as if each one contained an assignment for you. Over time, awareness became responsibility, and responsibility became a habit of carrying what was never placed in your hands. That habit may once have protected you, but this is where survival becomes a paradox. A pattern that once kept you safe can eventually become the very thing that prevents you from living in peace. That is why growth can feel disorienting. You are not only releasing what harmed you, you are releasing strategies that once made you feel secure. The old strategy says, watch everything, predict everything, prepare for every reaction. The new wisdom says, discern what is yours, respond to what is real, and release what never belonged to you. A spiritual warrior cannot remain in permanent readiness for a battle that has already ended. A watchman cannot guard the gate while chasing every sound beyond the wall. There comes a point when vigilance begins consuming the attention that discernment needs. That distinction is one of the hidden lessons of your recent season. You may have wondered why you felt tired even after certain problems became smaller. The problem changed, but your inner posture had not received the message. You were still preparing answers nobody had asked for and replaying outcomes that had already passed. Your body was in one room while your attention was scattered across many others. The old version of you believed more effort was always the answer. If something felt unclear, you tried harder to understand it. If someone pulled away, you searched harder for the reason. But there are moments when more effort only creates more noise around a truth that was already simple. The reframe is not that effort has no value. The reframe is that effort must serve clarity, not replace it. You cannot create a clean signal by filling every quiet space with another interpretation. Sometimes the next level of obedience is refusing to interfere with what has already become clear. That is why your recent restraint matters so much. You were presented with something that once would have pulled you into defense, analysis, or emotional labor. This time, you did not feed it the same way. You may have thought you were merely tired of repeating yourself. Heaven saw that the old agreement was no longer receiving automatic obedience. When automatic obedience to an old pattern ends, attention begins returning, first as silence, then as space, then as the ability to notice what had been hidden beneath constant internal noise. Do not mistake that empty space for absence. Clearing often happens before direction becomes obvious. The cycle does not always return looking dangerous. Sometimes it returns wrapped in familiarity, concern, or obligation. Discernment becomes powerful when familiarity no longer automatically receives trust. Sacred compassion has structure. Your peace is not proof that you stopped caring, and your silence is not proof that you have nothing to say. It may be proof that you no longer need words to rescue an identity God has already been establishing in private. Now pay attention to the next connection. Something you have felt in your own life is going to meet something observed in a research laboratory, and the meeting point between those two worlds will explain why clarity can feel spiritual and practical at the same time. The important part is not a dramatic claim. It is the possibility that what you have called lost capacity may have a more specific explanation than you were ever given. But you need the why before the what. If I gave you a tool before showing you the problem it is meant to address, It would sound like one more object placed on top of an already crowded life. You do not need another thing to chase. You need to understand what has been consuming the receiver. The why begins with fragmentation. I mean, the ordinary condition of attention being pulled in too many directions for too long. One part of you is completing the task in front of you, while another is rehearsing a conversation, another is scanning for what might go wrong, and another is wondering whether you disappointed someone. Live that way long enough, and fog begins to feel like personality. You start telling yourself that you are simply not as sharp as you used to be, and lowered expectation becomes part of your identity. But a receiver under constant internal competition has less quiet space for integration. What you call fog may be the lived experience of too many signals competing at once. Now, the what? The answer we are moving toward is not about replacing your spiritual life with machinery, and it is not about reducing sacred experience to a technical formula. It is about understanding that your mind has structure, coordination, and patterns of communication that matter. The practical question is whether that coordination can be supported in a way that helps the receiver operate with greater unity. That is why the research will matter when we reach it. It gives language to something you have already felt. There are days when you are present, clear, creative, and able to connect ideas without forcing them. There are other days when the same mind feels scattered even though your character, calling, and desire to do what is right have not changed. If character did not disappear, fog should not be turned into a moral verdict. You called yourself inconsistent when you were overloaded. You questioned your discernment when your inner world had been crowded by unresolved demands. But shame cannot organize what overload has fragmented. The person beneath the fog is still there, and now the who. This matters especially for the person who has carried responsibility for others for a long time. The parent who thinks 3 steps ahead for everyone. The provider who remains steady while carrying private pressure. The watchman who notices shifts nobody else seems to notice, and then wonders why the mind never fully settles. It also matters for the cycle breaker because generational patterns are not only stories people tell, they can become repeated ways of reacting, attending, bracing, choosing, and interpreting the world. One generation learns to survive by scanning for what might go wrong. The next grows up believing that constant scanning is simply what responsible people do. A child can become an adult who cannot rest inside a good moment because part of the mind is already preparing for its loss. This is how an old pattern keeps traveling even after the original danger is gone. And here is the generational clue I do not want you to miss. Your recent choice may matter beyond one person or one event because you interrupted a repeated mode of response. You did not merely avoid one argument. You showed your inner world that familiar pressure no longer gets to choose your behavior. A future generation may only know that peace feels more natural in the environment you helped create. That is why your victory is larger than a single moment. You finally did something the old pattern trained you not to do, yet I am still separating the visible behavior from the deeper decision beneath it. The behavior is evidence. The decision underneath is the real threshold. The same outward action can grow from entirely different roots. Silence can come from fear, or it can come from clarity that no longer needs to argue. Walking away can be punishment, or it can be peace, becoming more valuable than control. Heaven reads the difference, because heaven reads what governs the action. When the old bait returns, watch what happens inside you first. If your heart does not rush to earn understanding, if your mind no longer spends hours constructing the perfect defense, notice that. Those are not small changes in a person who once measured safety by other people's approval. We are approaching the point where the practical and spiritual lines will converge more clearly. The research question will return with names, history, and a specific model of coordinated mental function. But first, one more foundation is needed. You need to see why private preparation so often comes before public elevation. David was anointed before the throne reflected it. Joseph carried a future long before the environment around him agreed with it. Their outer reality lagged behind what had already been formed in character. Your life can contain the same tension. Something can be true before it becomes obvious. A cycle can be broken before everyone attached to the old version of you understands what happened. So carry the question forward without forcing the answer. What if the fog was never your identity? What if the old survival pattern consumed more of your attention than you realized? And what if the quiet victory heaven celebrated was also the moment you stopped feeding the pattern that kept your receiver crowded? The next movement will show why what is formed in hidden places often receives public confirmation only after the inner work is already complete. You are not being asked to become someone else. The cycle breaker does not manufacture a new soul. The cycle breaker stops handing old patterns the authority to speak for the future. And that is why the silence around you is becoming sacred. It is not empty. It is the place where scattered pieces are beginning to stop competing for control. Stay close to that quiet, because the next truth will show you why hidden preparation can look like delay right up until the moment everything begins to make sense. Chosen one, there is a reason hidden preparation feels so strange while you are living through it. The inner work can be real, while the outer world still looks unchanged. That gap creates one of the hardest tests of faith, because you can know something has shifted inside you and still wake up to the same room, the same responsibilities, and the same unanswered questions. This is where many people begin doubting what was formed in private. They assume that if the promise were real, the evidence would already be visible. They look for movement around them and forget to ask what has already changed within them. But heaven has never needed public applause to recognize private obedience. David understood this long before a throne ever carried his name. He was anointed, while his circumstances still looked ordinary. He returned to familiar fields after receiving a word that pointed toward something much larger. The oil touched him before the environment around him had any reason to treat him differently. Imagine the tension of that season. Something has been spoken over your future, yet your daily life still asks you to perform yesterday duties. You know there is more, yet nobody around you has changed the way they see you. That tension can make preparation feel like contradiction. But David did not become king because everyone suddenly agreed that he looked like one. He was being formed through decisions made while no crowd was watching. Courage was developing before Goliath ever stood in front of him. Discernment was developing before leadership required it. Public elevation later revealed what private obedience had already built. That is the first mirror I want you to see. Your recent victory may not have produced an obvious reward because the reward was never the first measurement. The first measurement was whether the old pattern could still command you. Heaven was watching the response before heaven ever allowed the result to become visible. This is why the metric of heaven feels so different from the metric of the world. The world measures who noticed, who praised you, who apologized, who returned, who opened the door, and who finally admitted you were right. Heaven measures whether you remained aligned when none of those things happened. Heaven measures whether your inner standard survived the absence of external confirmation. You may have wanted one person to acknowledge what they did, You may have hoped a door would open quickly enough to prove that leaving the old one was correct. You may have wanted a visible sign that would make the entire decision easier to explain. But sometimes the lack of immediate confirmation is exactly what reveals whether the transformation is real. If everybody applauds the moment you change, you never discover whether you can remain changed without applause. If the replacement arrives instantly, you never discover whether peace itself has become enough reason to stop returning. The quiet after obedience can expose whether you were following truth or bargaining for a reward. That is why delay must be reframed. Delay is not always refusal. It is not always evidence that you misunderstood the season. Sometimes delay is the space between internal completion and external manifestation. What has already become true in you may simply be waiting for the visible world to catch up. Joseph lived inside that tension in a different way. He carried a dream long before his environment resembled it. The dream did not prevent the pit. It did not prevent betrayal. It did not prevent the years when his circumstances looked like the opposite of what he had seen. Yet the delay did not cancel the formation. Joseph had to become the person capable of carrying what the dream represented. He learned responsibility in places that did not look like promotion. He learned integrity when compromise might have seemed easier. He learned how to remain useful without needing every room to recognize his future. The destination was not the only part of the promise. The formation of the receiver mattered too. That is the second mirror. You have been asking when the outer thing will arrive, while heaven has been watching what happens to the person who must receive it. A larger opportunity requires more than desire. A healthier relationship requires more than longing. A different season requires a version of you that will not recreate the old one inside new circumstances. This is why your recent restraint matters more than it looked. If a new door opened while you still needed old approval, you might carry that need into the new room. If a healthy person appeared while chaos still felt like chemistry, you might overlook peace because it did not trigger the familiar intensity. If abundance arrived while guilt still controlled your choices, you might apologize for receiving what you had prayed for. Preparation is not punishment. Preparation is what makes the promise sustainable. The point is not to keep you waiting forever. The point is to prevent a new season from becoming another stage where an old pattern repeats itself. That is why a cycle breaker cannot measure progress only by speed. Sometimes the most important progress is invisible because it is happening at the level of response, identity, and expectation. You stop chasing what withdraws. You stop translating confusion into destiny. You stop treating emotional exhaustion as proof that something matters. And this brings us to the hidden metric again. Heaven is not asking how impressive the moment looked. Heaven is asking what governed you when the moment arrived. Did fear choose for you, or did clarity choose for you? Did the old wound speak first, or did the new standard remain standing? This is where private obedience becomes more powerful than public performance. Anyone can declare strength when nothing is testing it. Anyone can speak about peace before the old trigger returns. But when the familiar pressure appears and you no longer become the familiar version of yourself, formation has moved from language into identity. The outside world may still be reading an outdated version of you. Some people will continue approaching you as though the old buttons still work. They may expect the apology, the explanation, the immediate response, or the emotional labor they once received from you. Their expectations do not determine your identity. This creates two verdicts at the same time. One verdict belongs to the visible world. It says nothing has changed because the bank account, relationship status, job title, or public circumstance still looks similar. The other verdict belongs to the inner transformation. It says the pattern that would have carried yesterday into tomorrow no longer has the same authority. Those two verdicts can coexist for a season. That is why you must be careful not to let visible delay rewrite invisible progress. A field can look empty while roots are already taking hold beneath it. The absence of fruit on the surface does not mean nothing has begun. This is where many people abandon a process too early. They see no immediate proof and return to what is familiar. They reopen a door because the hallway feels too quiet. They reconnect with a cycle because waiting feels more uncomfortable than repetition. Then they call the repetition confirmation when it is really fear of the unknown. But you did something different. You remained in the quiet longer than the old version of you would have tolerated. You allowed unanswered questions to exist without forcing yourself back into a familiar answer. That may be one of the clearest signs that your inner standard is becoming stronger than your old survival pattern. Do not miss the importance of that. A person who can remain peaceful without immediate proof becomes difficult for old cycles to manipulate. Urgency loses power. Guilt loses speed. Familiar confusion no longer feels like a command. The gate begins responding to discernment rather than pressure. David did not run back to the field and deny the anointing because the throne had not appeared. Joseph did not need the dream to unfold the next morning for the dream to have meaning. Their stories remind you that delay and denial are not the same thing. The timing between preparation and elevation is often where identity becomes stable. If elevation happens before identity stabilizes, a person can spend the next season trying to prove they belong there. But when identity is settled first, opportunity no longer has to provide worth. It becomes an assignment rather than a rescue. That is crucial for you. The next season is not meant to convince you that you are valuable. It is meant to meet a person who already stopped begging circumstances to determine value. The chosen one who enters a new room, still needing every person in that room to approve them, can be controlled by the room. The chosen one who knows what was formed in private moves differently. There is less performance. There is less desperation to be understood. There is more capacity to notice what is aligned and what only looks impressive. Discernment becomes sharper because approval is no longer drowning it out. And this is where the science question begins moving closer again. There is a practical reason why chronic divided attention can make clear discernment more difficult. When the mind is repeatedly pulled between the present moment, old memories, anticipated reactions, unfinished tasks, and constant stimulation, integration becomes harder to experience. You can have sincere intention while still feeling mentally scattered. That is not a moral failure, it is a clue. Later, we are going to look at a line of research connected to how different parts of the brain cooperate, how integrated processing matters, and why the feeling of being mentally whole can differ so dramatically from the feeling of running on fragments. I am bringing that closer now for a reason. The spiritual lesson and the practical lesson are beginning to touch the same point. Hidden preparation has been reducing some of the emotional noise that kept your attention divided. The less energy you spend maintaining old cycles, the more clearly you can notice what your mind is doing underneath them. Think about the child version of you for a moment. There may have been a time when curiosity felt natural. Ideas came quickly, and you could become absorbed in something without constantly monitoring how you were being perceived. Then, life became louder. Responsibilities multiplied. Your attention became a resource everyone seemed to need. You learned to switch rapidly between roles. One moment you were solving a problem, the next, you were responding to a message, then remembering an obligation, then replaying a conversation from yesterday. Eventually, divided attention stopped feeling unusual because it became the normal background of adult life. But normal does not always mean optimal. A familiar state can become so constant that you stop recognizing it as a state at all. That is why the question about lost clarity matters. You may not be trying to become someone extraordinary. You may simply be trying to recover a degree of inner cooperation that once felt natural. We will go deeper into that later. For now, notice the parallel. David was already anointed before the throne. Joseph already carried the internal seeds of leadership before the position. In the same way, the capacity you are trying to recover may already belong to the design you were given, rather than something foreign you must manufacture. That should change the tone of the search. You are not chasing a missing identity. You are learning what has interfered with access to capacities that have been buried beneath noise, vigilance, stress, and repetition. Restoration feels different from invention. This is also why the recent quiet in your life can serve you. Every closed gate removes one source of unnecessary signal. Every boundary that no longer requires explanation returns a small amount of attention. Every time you refuse to rehearse a conversation that does not need to happen, you reclaim part of the mental field. Clearing is not dramatic, but it creates conditions. Conditions matter. A seed does not grow because you shout at it. It grows because soil, light, water, and time create an environment where what is already inside the seed can unfold. The same principle is helping you understand this season. Your transformation is creating conditions for accelerated fulfillment, but do not confuse acceleration with haste. Haste is pressure. Acceleration is what becomes possible when unnecessary resistance falls away. A decision that once took 6 months may take 6 days because you no longer need 10 people to approve it. A door that once confused you may become obvious because the counterfeit no longer looks attractive. A healthy relationship may feel recognizable because you stopped mistaking inconsistency for depth. An opportunity may become visible because part of your mind is no longer occupied with proving something to someone who has already decided not to see you clearly. That is the practical side of clearing. And there is something else most people miss. When heaven delays public confirmation, it is not always because you are waiting on heaven. Sometimes the waiting reveals whether you are still waiting on people. That distinction can change everything. You may say that you are waiting for the next season, but underneath it, you may still be waiting for an apology from the old one. You may say you are ready to move forward, while part of you is still hoping someone behind you will finally recognize what they lost. Public elevation cannot fully free you if private vindication is still controlling your attention. This is where maturity becomes confrontational. You may never receive the explanation that makes the past feel fair. You may never hear the apology in the exact words you imagined. The question is whether your future must remain attached to that missing sentence. David could not require Saul to understand him before moving into purpose. Joseph could not require his brothers to rewrite the past before becoming useful in the present. Their authority grew when their identity stopped depending on people who once misread them. And your authority is growing in the same direction. You are becoming less governable by old emotional debts. You are learning that closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes closure is the moment you stop asking a closed season to provide the key to the next one. That is why the hidden victory is moving closer. The thing you finally did is connected to the point where you stopped requiring an old pattern to confirm your new identity. I am narrowing it now, but I am not opening it completely yet. Remember the moment I asked you to think about. The familiar pressure returned. The old reaction was available. You could have reached backward for the same kind of approval, explanation, or emotional certainty. But something in you chose differently. The world may not have recorded that moment. Nobody may have written it down. No public announcement marked the transition. But if the old cycle depended on that response to remain alive, then your refusal to feed it was not small. It was structural. And this is why heaven can celebrate before the visible reward appears. Heaven is not celebrating a fantasy outcome that has not happened. Heaven is recognizing the formation that makes a different future possible. The throne did not create David. The palace did not create Joseph. The position revealed what private seasons had already formed. So, if your circumstances are slower than your inner transformation, do not let the slower thing define the faster one. Your environment may still be processing a decision your spirit has already made. Carry this into the next movement. There is a version of you that once moved through life with more natural clarity than you may remember. There is also a reason adult attention can become fragmented in ways that feel like fog, hesitation, and lost creative capacity. Soon, the research line I have been approaching will give that question a more concrete shape. But before we reach that point, remember the two verdicts. The visible world may still say, wait. The inner evidence may already say, complete. And when those verdicts disagree, the person you have become is revealed by which one you allow to define you. You are not being trained to ignore reality. You are being trained to see more than one layer of it. Circumstances matter, but so does character. Outcomes matter, but so does formation. Timing matters, but delay does not erase what has already changed. Chosen one, the next threshold is where preparation becomes restoration. We are moving from the question of why you had to become different into the question of what has been suppressed beneath years of noise and divided attention. And when that line finally meets the research I have been holding back, you will understand why this season was never only about surviving what happened to you. It was also about becoming capable of receiving what comes after it. Chosen one, there is a memory inside you that may be more important than you realize. Before life became crowded with responsibility, before you learned to monitor every room and anticipate every reaction, there was a version of your mind that moved with a different kind of freedom. Ideas connected more naturally. Curiosity did not need permission. You could become absorbed in something simply because it fascinated you. You may remember learning quickly when you were young. You may remember inventing stories, solving problems in unusual ways, noticing patterns adults did not expect you to notice. Perhaps nobody called it extraordinary because to you it felt normal. That is the childhood clue I want you to keep close. Some of what you are trying to recover now may not be something new at all. Life gradually trained you into another rhythm. School rewarded certain answers. Responsibility rewarded predictability. The modern world rewarded speed, constant switching, constant availability, and the ability to keep going even when your attention had been divided into pieces. Little by little, the natural spaciousness of your mind became crowded. Then adulthood added another layer. Messages arrived while you were working. Notifications interrupted your thoughts. Other people's needs followed you into moments that once belonged to silence. You learned to think about tomorrow while solving today and replay yesterday while trying to rest. Eventually, fragmentation became so familiar that you stopped calling it fragmentation. You simply called it life. And this is where the fog paradox begins. When clarity becomes harder to reach, most people assume the answer is more effort. They create more lists, consume more advice, push harder, wake earlier, and blame themselves when concentration still feels inconsistent. But if overload is part of the problem, adding more pressure can deepen the exact condition you are trying to escape. Think about that carefully. If a room is already full of competing voices, speaking louder does not necessarily create clarity. If 10 signals are fighting for the same receiver, adding an 11th signal does not restore order. Sometimes, the path back to clarity begins not with greater force, but with greater coordination. This is why everything we have discussed about boundaries and emotional cycles matters here. The old pattern did not only cost you peace, it cost attention. Every unfinished argument carried mentally into the next day occupied part of the receiver. Every imagined reaction you prepared for in advance occupied another part. Every moment spent wondering whether someone misunderstood you created another internal conversation. Every attempt to predict every possible outcome created more branches for your attention to follow. None of those actions made you weak. They show how sincerely you tried to create safety through awareness. But awareness, without a gate, becomes overload. The watchman was never meant to chase every movement beyond the wall. The watchman observes, discerns, and decides what deserves response. Your spiritual sensitivity becomes powerful when it is paired with selection. Otherwise, every signal receives equal authority, and the mind becomes a crowded room where nothing can fully land. That is why the clearing happening in your life matters more than it appears. You are not only removing unhealthy patterns, you are reducing unnecessary signals. When you stop rehearsing an old conversation, one channel becomes quiet. When you stop monitoring someone who no longer has access to your future, another channel becomes quiet. Then something unexpected can happen. You begin hearing your own thoughts without having to fight for them. You notice ideas returning. You make a decision without needing 3 days of emotional negotiation afterward. The result can feel spiritual because peace is present, but it can also feel practical because your attention is becoming less divided. This is where you must stop calling yourself lazy, dull, or incapable. Those labels are too crude for what has actually happened. A mind that has spent years scanning, adapting, protecting, anticipating, and carrying responsibility may feel tired without being broken. The fog may say more about the load than it says about your potential. And if the load changes, the experience of the mind can change with it. That possibility matters because many chosen ones have quietly accepted a reduced version of themselves. You remember being sharper, but you assume age simply took it away. You remember creating freely, but now every idea feels followed by criticism before it has time to form. You remember trusting your first clear perception, but years of second-guessing trained you to interrogate everything. What if some of that can be reversed? Do not turn that question into another demand on yourself. I am not telling you to become obsessed with optimizing every thought. I am asking you to question the belief that the current level of fog is your permanent identity. There is a difference between accepting yourself and accepting every limitation as irreversible. The child version of you was not carrying a calendar filled with obligations. That child was not checking messages while eating, solving family problems while working, and mentally revisiting a difficult conversation while trying to sleep. The environment around your attention was different. So, before you judge the adult mind, notice the conditions the adult mind has been asked to survive. This is the decline arc most people never name. First, there is natural curiosity and integrated attention. Then come structures that reward specialization, repetition, constant switching, and external measurement. Then adulthood adds stress, responsibility, screens, interruptions, and emotional vigilance. Years later, the person looks back and wonders where the bright, creative mind went. The answer may be more hopeful than disappearance. Because disappearance and suppression are not the same thing, a capacity that is gone cannot simply be accessed again. A capacity that has become dormant, underused, or poorly coordinated is a different story. That distinction changes the emotional meaning of the entire problem. If you believe the best part of your mind is gone, you grieve it. If you believe access has been disrupted, you begin asking, what supports restoration? One frame leads toward resignation. The other leads toward investigation. This is why I told you earlier that restoration feels different from invention. You are not trying to manufacture a foreign intelligence and attach it to yourself. You are asking whether the mind can return to a more integrated way of operating. The question is not how to become someone else. The question is how much of you has been operating below its designed coordination. Now, bring the spiritual lesson beside that practical question. You have spent this season learning not to abandon your peace for old patterns. Every time you stop feeding those patterns, the receiver becomes less crowded. That does not mean a boundary is a neurological treatment. It means the life you are building creates different conditions for the mind that must live inside it. This matters because God does not prepare only the door. God also forms the person who must recognize the door when it opens. A blessing that cannot be recognized can pass near you and still feel invisible. An opportunity can appear, but a mind trapped in familiar fear may interpret it through yesterday. A healthy connection can arrive, but a person trained by chaos may dismiss peace because peace does not feel intense enough. The receiver matters. Hold that metaphor carefully because we are going to use it for a while. Imagine that the message is clear, but the receiver is carrying interference. The answer is present, but too many competing signals make it difficult to distinguish. You do not solve that problem by blaming the message, and you do not solve it by insulting the receiver. You ask what is creating the interference and what helps restore coordination. This is the deeper reason. Effort alone has not solved everything. You can pray sincerely and still be mentally tired. You can have a strong sense of purpose and still struggle to hold attention. You can know what matters and still lose the thread halfway through a task. Those experiences do not cancel your calling. They tell you that intention and capacity are connected but not identical. A spiritual warrior can possess courage while needing rest. A cycle breaker can understand the truth while still carrying habits of vigilance learned over many years. A watchman can have discernment while living in an environment that constantly fragments attention. Identity should never become a reason to deny practical reality. True authority can look directly at reality without surrendering identity to it. That is why this next movement is important. We are moving away from the idea that more preparation is always the answer. You have prepared, you have reflected, you have endured. At some point, the question changes from how much more can I force myself to do into what condition am I doing it from? There are people who can sit for an hour trying to solve something and remain trapped inside the same loop. Then, on another day, in a clearer state, the answer appears in minutes. The difference is not always intelligence. Sometimes it is the degree to which the mind can bring its resources together instead of operating as competing fragments. You have felt versions of that state. There are rare mornings when everything seems to connect. Your words come easily. Your decisions feel clean. You notice the next step. without wrestling with 20 alternatives. You may call it flow, alignment, clarity, or simply a good day. Then the state fades, and you wonder why you cannot command it whenever you need it. That question has been asked from more than one direction. Spiritual traditions have described stillness, discernment, and unified attention in their own language. Researchers have approached coordination through the structure and function of the brain. The vocabularies are different, but both are interested in what happens when the human being stops functioning like scattered pieces. This is where the question from earlier begins to sharpen. What if what you call fog is not only about having too few ideas, but about different processes failing to cooperate efficiently? What if creative insight, logical analysis, pattern recognition, language, memory, and intuition feel different when the system operates with greater coordination? That is much closer to the door we are about to open. And notice the implication. If coordination matters, then simply increasing stimulation may not solve the problem. More information is not necessarily more integration. More sound is not necessarily more signal. More effort can sometimes become another layer of interference. This is why some people consume endless productivity content and still feel mentally exhausted. They keep adding methods to a receiver already overloaded with methods. They learn a new morning routine, then a new breathing practice, then another concentration technique, then another system for managing the systems. Eventually, the search for clarity becomes another source of fragmentation. You do not need 20 new rituals. You need to understand the mechanism before deciding what deserves your attention. That is also why I am not naming the practical tool yet. Proof must come before the name. If a name arrives before the reason, the mind correctly becomes suspicious. You deserve to know what question the tool is trying to answer, where the underlying idea came from, and why the mechanism is being presented as different from ordinary brainwave tracks or generic meditation audio. The order matters. First, understand the receiver. Then, understand the research. Then, listen to what happened for people who approached the same problem from very different lives. Only after that does the name mean anything. Because a name without context is just another object asking for your attention. And this entire message has been teaching you to stop giving attention away simply because something asks loudly. The tool must earn its place inside the story by answering a problem we have already made clear. The problem is not that you lack worth. The problem is not that God withheld intelligence from you. The problem is not that you failed some secret spiritual test because your mind feels tired. The problem we are investigating is whether years of divided attention and modern conditioning can leave a mind functioning with less integration than it is capable of expressing. That is a very different question, and it leads to a very different kind of answer. The product material behind the research we are approaching points to a striking childhood contrast. It describes research suggesting that creative genius-level performance is extraordinarily common in young children, while only a tiny fraction of adults retain comparable levels later in life. In the framework we are examining, the contrast is described as roughly 98% in childhood and fewer than 1 in 1,000 adults maintaining it. Whether you hear those numbers as shocking or uncomfortable, notice what they are meant to make you ask. What happens between childhood and adulthood? If potential begins high and expression becomes rare, what changed? The easy answer is that children grow up and reality becomes more complicated. That is true, but it does not explain everything this model is trying to describe. The deeper claim is that modern life gradually trains the brain away from a naturally integrated mode. Repetition, specialization, chronic stress, distraction, and constant external demands can reinforce partial patterns of operation until the reduced state begins to feel normal. This is not a reason to become paranoid about school, technology, or society. Those systems also provide extraordinary benefits. The point is subtler. A way of life can be useful in many respects, while still asking the nervous system and attention to adapt in ways that have costs. And the cost may show up as something you recognize intimately. You sit down to create and immediately evaluate before the idea is born. You try to solve a practical problem, but emotional associations interrupt the logic. You sense a pattern intuitively, then distrust it because you cannot explain it quickly enough. One part of the mind produces, while another part interrupts, judges, monitors, and edits. Imagine what becomes possible when cooperation increases. Not perfection, not supernatural intelligence on command. Cooperation. That word is important because it protects this message from becoming another fantasy of endless self-improvement. The goal is not to turn you into a machine that never tires. The goal is to ask, what happens when capacities that already belong to you stop working against each other? Restoration is about partnership inside the mind. This is also where your spiritual formation becomes strangely relevant again. You have been learning the same lesson in your life. Stop letting every voice compete for authority. Stop giving equal access to what belongs and what does not belong. Let the right things come into alignment. The life lesson and the brain question are not identical, but the metaphor is powerful. Your outer life has been moving from fragmentation toward alignment. Now we are asking whether there is a practical way to support greater coordination within the receiver itself. That is why this part of the message belongs here and not at the beginning. At the beginning, you might have heard only a claim. Now you understand the problem it is trying to solve. You know what it feels like to live with too many open channels. You know the exhaustion of being physically present while attention is scattered across unresolved demands. You know how clarity changes when some of those demands finally become quiet. So, when we turn to the research, you are not hearing an abstract lecture. You are listening for language that describes something you have already experienced. And there is another reason this matters before the hidden victory is fully revealed. The decision heaven celebrated did more than close an emotional cycle. It created space. The choice removed an old claim on your attention. You stopped feeding something that had been using your mental energy as fuel. That is why the next season may feel clearer even before anything spectacular happens. When less of you is occupied by yesterday, more of you becomes available for today. That sounds simple, but entire lives change when attention stops living in places the body has already left. This is where accelerated fulfillment begins to make sense without turning into a promise of instant results. A person with greater clarity recognizes aligned opportunities faster. They make cleaner decisions. They waste less time arguing internally with what they already know. Acceleration can be the natural consequence of reduced resistance. You do not need every door to open at once. You need enough clarity to recognize the door that matters. You do not need everyone to agree. You need enough stability to move when alignment becomes clear. You do not need to recover every version of yourself from the past. You need access to the capacities required for the assignment in front of you. That is, restoration with purpose. And now we are standing at the science threshold. There is a piece of research connected to the way the two hemispheres of the human brain operate. and it became important enough to be associated with one of the most recognized scientific honors in the world. The name attached to that work is Dr. Roger Sperry, and in 1981, his research on the divided brain was recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Do not rush past that name, because the reason it matters is not that a Nobel Prize makes every claim that comes afterward automatically true. The reason it matters in this story is that Sperry helped change how scientists understood specialized functions and interaction across the two hemispheres. That history became part of the foundation for a much newer question. What happens when the two sides work with greater coordination? That is the question we are carrying forward. In the material we are about to examine, whole brain activation is used to describe a more synchronized condition in which the hemispheres operate with greater cooperation instead of behaving like isolated resources. The claim is not that one hemisphere is good and the other is bad. The claim is that the value comes from communication. Logic does not need to destroy intuition. Creativity does not need to reject structure. Pattern recognition does not need to compete with analysis. What if the stronger state is integration? That is why the childhood clue mattered. Children often move between imagination, experimentation, emotion, movement, and pattern without dividing themselves into strict categories. Modern adulthood often rewards narrower modes for long periods at a time. The research path we are entering asks whether greater synchronization can help restore something closer to that integrated state. And this is where I want you to notice the reveal threshold. A team spent years trying to translate this idea into something practical. They were not trying to build another motivational lecture or another generic track that simply asks you to relax. They were working from the question of neural coordination, and before I tell you what they created, you need to hear what happened when people with very ordinary problems encountered that approach. One person came to it carrying emotional exhaustion and the feeling that spiritual practices no longer reached the same depth they once had. Another came to it because mental fog was interfering with practical decisions and work. Different lives, different pain points. The same underlying complaint, something in the receiver no longer felt fully online. Their stories matter before the name does. Because if this were only about a clever name, there would be nothing worth holding open. The next movement is where research becomes personal, where the Nobel Prize thread connects to real experiences, and where the thing I have deliberately refused to name finally steps into the light. And when it does, remember where we began. You are not being asked to worship a tool. You are not being asked to replace God, prayer, discernment, or the inner work that brought you this far. You are being shown a possible support for the receiver after spending half this message understanding why the receiver matters. The distinction is everything. The promise is still sacred. The choice is still yours. The formation still belongs to the heart. But if there is a practical way to support greater coordination in the mind that must recognize, interpret, and act upon what comes next, then that possibility deserves to be examined with clarity rather than dismissed or idolized. That is where we are going now, and there is one more reason you should stay close. The name of the tool is not the biggest revelation waiting for you. The deeper revelation is still the quiet act you performed recently, the act that proved an old cycle no longer owns your response. The practical answer is about to arrive. The spiritual answer is still coming. Chosen one, we have reached the place where the question about the receiver can finally begin closing. Earlier I asked you to consider whether the clarity you thought you had lost was truly gone, or whether years of divided attention had made it harder to access. Now the research thread, the lived experience, and the practical solution come together. In 1981, Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize for research that changed how people understood the specialized functions of the two hemispheres of the brain. The important point for this message is not a simplistic idea that one side is creative and the other is logical. The deeper point is that the human brain contains specialized systems whose communication and cooperation matter. The material behind the approach we have been discussing takes that foundation and asks a practical question. What happens when the two hemispheres operate with greater synchronization instead of feeling like separate resources competing for control? It describes this coordinated condition as whole brain activation. That question becomes especially interesting when you remember the childhood clue. The material points to research describing roughly 98% of young children as performing at a creative genius level, while fewer than 1 in 1,000 adults maintain comparable creative performance later in life. The argument is not that adults become less worthy. The argument is that modern patterns of living gradually suppress the integrated state that once came more naturally. Before I tell you what was created from that idea, listen to what happened for two people who approached the same problem from completely different directions. A woman from California had already spent years trying to become more present. She prayed, she journaled, she tried meditation and practices that were supposed to help her settle internally, yet she kept describing the same frustration. She believed what she was saying, but she could not consistently feel the clarity behind it. According to the material, after using the approach we are about to name, she began noticing a change in the way her days felt. She described more internal openness and less of the fog that had made every spiritual practice feel distant. What mattered was not that she suddenly became a different person. She felt more able to access the person she already knew was there. Then there was a man from Texas whose problem looked much more practical. His mind felt overloaded, decisions took too long, and work that once felt straightforward had become mentally expensive. He had become so accustomed to the fog that he barely recognized it as fog anymore. The material says that after using the same approach, he noticed greater mental clarity and began making decisions with less internal friction. His description was not about becoming superhuman. It was about feeling as though more of his mental capacity was available at the same time. Two very different lives, but one shared complaint. The receiver did not feel fully online. That is why I gave you their experiences before giving you the name. A team led by Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York City, developed an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence around what the product describes as neural sync technology. The physical protocol is simple. Headphones, eyes closed. Relax. 8 minutes a day. They call it the Genius Switch. The product is positioned specifically around whole brain activation and synchronization between the two hemispheres. It is not presented as another ordinary brainwave track, and that distinction matters if you have already tried binaural beats, gamma tracks, frequency audio, or other brainwave products and felt disappointed. The product material argues that brainwave approaches address only part of the picture. While this method is designed around hemisphere synchronization at the whole brain level, that is the mechanism gap I wanted you to understand before the name appeared. A person can listen to something designed to encourage a particular brainwave state and still be dealing with a broader problem of coordination. In the framework used by the Genius Switch, The goal is not simply to create a temporary mood. The goal is to support synchronization. The protocol does not require you to spend 20 minutes practicing a difficult breathing method. It does not require an in-person neurofeedback session costing hundreds of dollars. It does not require a home neurofeedback machine costing thousands. According to the product material, you put on headphones, close your eyes, relax, and listen for 8 minutes. You also do not need to abandon meditation if meditation already serves you. You do not need to stop prayer. You do not need another complicated mantra or ritual. The audio is presented as something that works beneath conscious effort, so the physical requirement stays intentionally simple. And this is where identity matters more than price. The Genius Switch is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who has already recognized that preparation is not only about the promise outside you. It is also about the condition of the mind that must recognize the promise when it appears. It is for the person who has spent years believing the fog was a character flaw and is finally willing to investigate whether the problem has a more specific address. It is for the cycle breaker who understands that constant vigilance is not the same thing as discernment. It is for the watchman who has learned that every signal does not deserve equal access. And it is for the person who is tired of treating a reduced version of mental clarity as permanent simply because it has been familiar for a long time. Now let me make the practical side clear. The material says, colleagues considered the approach valuable even at $500. In-person neurofeedback can cost around $300 per hour, while some home systems can cost around $7,000. The Genius Switch was listed at $49. On the product page described in the material, the current offer reduces that by another $10, bringing the price to $39. It is digital, so there is no shipping, and access is delivered electronically. The material also says access remains yours after purchase. 4 bonuses are included with the offer. The first is a guided visualization from a highly rated creator associated with the Calm app, focused on imagining improvement across money, love, health, and happiness. The second is a smart grocery shopping guide covering common foods associated in the material with brain fog and shopping shortcuts. Intended to save more than $100 per month. The third is a classic manifestation book, more than 100 years old, included digitally instead of being purchased separately. The fourth is a printable infographic built around 5 habits intended to support an ideal future. These are presented as bonuses rather than separate purchases. The material also states that the offer is protected by a 100% money-back guarantee. The guarantee is described as applying even if you have listened repeatedly and simply decide the program did not deliver what you expected. It also cites 18,456 everyday Americans as users of the program. So the risk structure is simple. The material presents the main price as $39, adds the 4 bonuses, and places the purchase under the stated money-back guarantee. You can evaluate the details yourself rather than being asked to make the decision from pressure alone. But there is another part of the offer you should understand. The current $39 price is not described as permanent. The product material says the price can increase and that the current discount is tied to the page where the offer is being presented. I am not telling you that a spiritual door closes because you do not buy something. A commercial price changing and a spiritual calling are not the same thing. What matters is that waiting also has a cost when the problem is real. Every week spent operating through the same fog is another week of second-guessing decisions that might have been clearer. The provision near you does not become more valuable because you wait. The question is whether the receiver is able to recognize and respond to what is already in front of it. There is also a counterfeit version of this message that I want you to reject immediately. Do not turn a tool into an idol. Do not assume that purchasing an audio file proves faith. Do not let anyone convince you that a product can replace prayer, wisdom, discernment, medical care, personal responsibility, or obedience. The tool is not God. The tool does not create your identity. The tool does not decide your calling. At most, within the framework presented by the product, it is a practical support for the receiver. That distinction protects the entire message. If this approach speaks to the problem you have been recognizing, the product information is available through the link in the description and the pinned comment. Read the details. Consider the guarantee. Make the decision with clarity rather than emotional pressure. And now we leave the sales portion behind and return to the reason you were brought this far into the message. Because the deepest revelation was never the name of an audio program. It was you. The practical tool may support clarity, but it cannot make the decision that ended your old cycle. It cannot choose peace for you. It cannot refuse the familiar bait. It cannot stop you from abandoning yourself for approval. You did that. This is the trust bridge I need to make unmistakable. The genius switch, if you choose to explore it, belongs on the level of support. Your formation came through lived decisions, discipline, faith, pain, discernment, and the repeated choice to stop giving old patterns authority over your future. That is why the next revelation cannot be purchased. You already paid for it in another currency. You paid through nights when nobody understood why you were becoming quieter. You paid through the loneliness of not returning to what was familiar. You paid through moments when explaining yourself would have been easier than trusting what you already knew. And now we reach the confrontation. For a long time, part of you believed victory would finally be real when the people who misunderstood you understood you. You thought closure would arrive when someone apologized correctly. You thought peace would become permanent when the outside world finally admitted what you had been trying to explain. That belief kept an invisible thread tied to the old season. You could leave physically and still wait emotionally. You could stop speaking and still rehearse the speech. You could close the door and still listen for footsteps behind it. That is why separation alone was never the full victory. The old pattern did not only want access to your presence, it wanted access to your need for validation. As long as someone could make you question yourself by withholding understanding, part of your peace still belonged to them. The deepest gate was not outside you. It was the belief that being misunderstood was dangerous. That belief can make a good person over-explain everything. It can make a sensitive person return to rooms that already revealed their nature. It can make a cycle breaker keep negotiating with a pattern that has no intention of becoming healthy. And it can make silence feel unbearable, because silence leaves you without control over the story another person tells about you. But something happened recently. Someone did not understand. Something was left unresolved. A familiar pressure appeared. And for perhaps the first time in a very long time, you did not sacrifice your inner peace just to control the interpretation. That is not the full answer yet, but now you can see its outline. You stopped needing one of the old currencies. You stopped paying for connection with self-abandonment. You stopped purchasing temporary relief with long-term confusion. And once that currency lost value, the old system could no longer trade with you in the same way. This is why heaven celebrates differently from people. People often celebrate the visible promotion. the new relationship, the money, the breakthrough, the public vindication. Heaven can celebrate earlier because heaven sees when the internal agreement that would have sabotaged those things has finally been broken. The celebration begins at the root. A new relationship means very little if you still confuse anxiety with love. A new opportunity means very little if you still need everyone to approve your decisions. More money means very little if guilt can still command where every dollar goes. The blessing becomes sustainable when the old pattern cannot quietly rebuild itself inside the new environment. That is what preparation was doing. It was not trying to make you endlessly stronger so you could tolerate more dysfunction. It was making dysfunction less attractive to you. There is a difference. The old version of strength said, "I can endure this forever." The new version says, "I no longer need to prove strength by remaining where peace is repeatedly violated." The old version of loyalty said, "I will keep explaining until you understand me." The new version says, "Truth does not become false because someone refuses to receive it." The old version of love said, "I must keep the connection at any cost." The new version understands that a connection requiring self-betrayal is already too expensive. That is the confrontation many powerful people avoid. They want breakthrough without releasing the identity that survived through struggle. They want peace but still need chaos to prove they are needed. They want a new season while remaining emotionally employed by the old one. Then they wonder why every new room eventually develops the same atmosphere. You were approaching that crossroads. And the reason heaven smiled is connected to the fact that you did not take the old road again. In the next movement, I am going to name the exact inner act that completed this cycle. Not the surface behavior, not merely the boundary, not simply the silence. I am going to show you what happened underneath it. Because the thing you finally did was not just refusing to answer someone, it was not simply walking away, it was not merely becoming tired of the drama. Those were expressions of something deeper. The true victory occurred when you stopped betraying what you already knew in order to remain acceptable to someone committed to a version of you that no longer exists. We are one layer away from opening that completely. And when we do, you may finally understand why the moment felt so quiet to you while heaven treated it like completion. Chosen one, now we can finally name what happened. The victory was not that you became quieter. It was not that you stopped replying immediately. It was not that you walked away from one difficult conversation, ignored one message, or decided you were tired of explaining yourself. Those were only the visible movements around a decision that had already happened deeper inside you. The real victory was this. You stopped betraying your own peace and discernment just to be understood, accepted, or emotionally received by someone who had already shown you that they were committed to an older version of you. You finally allowed what you knew inside to remain true, even when somebody outside you refused to confirm it. That is what you finally did. And that is why this victory looked so small from the outside. There may have been no dramatic goodbye, no long speech, no perfect final sentence. Perhaps there was not even an argument. You simply reached a point where you recognized the familiar pull and did not abandon yourself to satisfy it. For years, that was the part nobody could see. They could see you answering. They could see you returning. They could see you trying one more time. What they could not see was the private exchange happening underneath every one of those actions. You were trading peace for temporary understanding. You were trading clarity for temporary connection. You were trading what you already knew for the possibility that another person might finally agree with it. And every time you made that trade, the old cycle survived another day. This is why the false target has to be exposed now. You thought the victory would be getting the apology. You thought the victory would be watching the person who overlooked you finally realize what they had lost. You thought the victory would be receiving the opportunity that proved everybody wrong. You thought heaven would celebrate when the outside result arrived. But that was never the first victory. The first victory was becoming free enough that you no longer needed the result to validate the transformation. That is the part most people miss entirely. If the apology arrives, and you still need it to believe your own experience, the old cycle still holds something. If the person returns, and you still need their return to confirm your worth, the old cycle still holds something. If the opportunity appears, and you still need it to prove that you were right, the old cycle still holds something. The visible reward can arrive while the invisible dependency remains untouched. Heaven was not only watching whether you left the pattern, heaven was watching whether you stopped needing the pattern to tell you who you were. That is why your recent moment mattered. Think back again. There was a moment when the old version of you could have stepped forward. You could have reopened the conversation. You could have explained what you meant one more time. You could have corrected the story somebody was telling about you. You could have tried to make them see the heart behind your decision. And perhaps every part of your old conditioning told you that doing nothing would mean losing control. But you did something your former self struggled to do. You allowed another person to misunderstand you without immediately abandoning your own clarity to repair their interpretation. That was the act, not the silence itself. The freedom underneath the silence. You finally understood that another person's misunderstanding does not automatically create an emergency inside your identity. You finally understood that you do not have to leave your own center every time someone else becomes uncomfortable with your boundaries. You finally understood that peace can remain peace, even when somebody calls it distance, selfishness, coldness, or change. That is why heaven celebrated, because a cycle that once controlled you through interpretation lost its strongest weapon. The weapon was never merely conflict. It was your fear of being seen incorrectly. As long as that fear remained stronger than your discernment, the old pattern could always pull you back. All it had to do was make you feel misunderstood. All it had to do was make you imagine what someone might be saying. All it had to do was create enough ambiguity that you felt compelled to explain. Then you would reopen the gate yourself. But this time, the gate stayed closed, not because your heart hardened, because your identity became steadier. That distinction is everything. A hardened person says, I no longer care what happens to anyone. A healed boundary says, I can care without abandoning what I know is right. A hardened person refuses connection because vulnerability feels dangerous. A cycle breaker can remain open to love while refusing to confuse love with endless access. You did not become less compassionate. You became less available for manipulation through compassion, and heaven recognized the difference. That is why your restraint carried more weight than the argument you could have won. Anyone can win an argument and remain trapped in the need to be understood. Anyone can have the final word and still spend the next 3 days wondering whether the other person accepted it. Anyone can block a number and still carry the conversation inside their head. External distance is easy compared with internal release. But something in you released, perhaps not perfectly. Perhaps the memory still returns. Perhaps there are moments when part of you still wants to explain what really happened. Transformation does not require the complete absence of old impulses. It means the impulse no longer automatically becomes obedience. That is the exact act narrowing I promised you. You did not win because the old voice disappeared. You won because it spoke and you did not hand it the steering wheel. That difference is enormous. The former version of you needed emotional resolution before moving forward. The emerging version of you can move forward while some questions remain unanswered. The former version of you needed everybody involved to understand the full story. The emerging version of you understands that truth does not stop being true because someone sees only part of it. The former version of you kept returning to the courtroom. The emerging version has left the building. That is why the silence afterward felt unfamiliar. You had spent so much of your life using mental activity to create a sense of control that peace initially felt like unfinished business. You thought, should I say one more thing? Should I clarify one point? Should I make sure they know I did not mean it that way? Then something deeper inside you answered without words. Enough, not enough, because you stopped loving. Enough, because you finally recognized the price of repeatedly proving a heart that God already knows. That was the threshold. The cycle breaker does not destroy the past. The cycle breaker stops financing its continuation. You stopped giving the old pattern attention as currency. You stopped giving it explanation as currency. You stopped giving it self-doubt as currency. And when the payment stopped, the system lost its ability to continue operating in the same way. This is the heaven logic behind the celebration. Heaven does not only measure outcomes, it measures what can now safely be entrusted to you without being pulled backward by the same dependency. If you receive more visibility, can you remain stable when people misinterpret you? If you receive more provision, can you make decisions without guilt controlling every choice? If you receive a healthier connection, can you allow consistency to feel good instead of searching for the intensity of uncertainty? If you receive influence, can you serve without returning to people-pleasing? The hidden victory answered those questions differently than before. Your response said, I no longer need everyone to approve the path before I walk it. Your response said, I can remain kind without surrendering my discernment. Your response said, I can allow a closed season to remain closed even when nostalgia tries to rename it. Your response said, I trust peace enough to stop chasing explanations. That is why heaven celebrates a decision before the visible reward. The decision determines what you will do with the reward when it arrives. Character protects what opportunity introduces. This is also why your generational identity matters here. Think of the patterns that can pass through a family without anyone deliberately choosing them. One person learns that love means keeping everybody happy. Another learns that disagreement means danger. Another learns that silence must be repaired immediately. Another learns to apologize simply to make tension disappear. Eventually, nobody remembers where the pattern began. It simply feels normal. Then one person begins noticing it. One person feels the discomfort of doing something different. One person decides that love can survive a boundary and that peace does not require unanimous approval. That person becomes the interruption. You are becoming that interruption. The people after you may never know every private battle that made their freedom possible. A child may simply grow up believing that no means no without guilt. A future relationship may simply feel safer because conflict does not automatically become abandonment. Someone may learn from watching you that being misunderstood for a moment is survivable. What feels like a private decision today can become a healthier emotional inheritance tomorrow. That is generational legacy. Not a grand speech about changing the family line, A different response repeated until the new response becomes normal. Heaven celebrates roots because roots decide what future fruit can exist. Now, I want to bring back the second thread without turning it into another distraction. Earlier, we discussed the condition of the receiver, the attention that becomes fragmented through years of stress, vigilance, and divided focus. We also discussed a practical support designed around greater coordination. Remember the place of that support correctly. It does not create this victory. It does not choose your boundary. It does not decide whom you trust. It does not produce obedience for you. Its role, if you choose to explore it, is simply to support greater clarity in the receiver that must carry the decisions you have already begun making. That distinction protects your authority. You are not outsourcing your identity to a tool. You are not buying permission to become a chosen one. You are not purchasing a divine assignment. You are simply allowed to support the mind that must walk through the assignment with as much clarity as possible. And then you return to the deeper work, because no amount of mental clarity can help someone who insists on betraying what clarity keeps showing them. That is why the spiritual victory had to come first. You learn to obey peace before asking for more signal. That is the correct order. Now, the first open loop can close. The thing heaven celebrated was not that you defeated another person. You did not win because someone else lost. You did not win because you became unreachable. You won because the old fear of being misunderstood stopped having enough authority to make you abandon yourself. You stayed aligned even without the guarantee that anyone outside you would approve. God smiled because the cycle reached for the version of you it had always controlled and discovered that person was no longer available. That is why you won. Not over them, over the agreement inside you that said your peace had to be sacrificed whenever connection was threatened. That agreement broke, and when that agreement broke, something else became possible. This is the new loop. What happens after a person stops returning to the cycle that once consumed so much of their attention? What begins filling the space? What changes when the energy once spent maintaining confusion becomes available for direction, creativity, relationships, work, and purpose? What does accelerated fulfillment actually look like after the internal resistance is reduced? That is where we go next, because breaking the cycle is not the end of the story. It creates room. At first, the room can feel empty. You may look around and wonder where everyone went. You may notice fewer conversations, fewer emotional emergencies, fewer moments where you feel desperately needed. Do not interpret that quiet through the old identity. An empty room after clearing is not evidence that you lost your purpose. It may be evidence that your purpose is no longer being buried under responsibilities that were never yours. The next stage is learning what belongs in the space you protected. This is where detachment begins turning into clearing. Clearing begins turning into reception. Reception begins turning into movement. And movement begins looking like accelerated fulfillment. Not because every wish suddenly appears, but because you are no longer spending half your strength negotiating with what you already know. You begin making decisions faster because fear no longer gets an equal vote. You recognize misalignment sooner because attraction no longer overrides discernment. You recognize healthy opportunity because peace no longer feels boring. You stop confusing familiar pain with destiny. That is what happens after the hidden victory. The next season does not need a more desperate version of you. It needs a clearer one. It needs the watchman whose gate is functioning. It needs the cycle breaker who can recognize the old pattern without becoming fascinated by it again. It needs the chosen one who understands that calling is not proven by how much pain you can tolerate. And something else begins happening. People who were accustomed to your old availability may respond to the new standard. Some will respect it. Some will test it. Some may disappear because access was the only form of relationship they understood. Do not confuse every departure with loss. Sometimes, the first evidence of a new standard is that what depended on the old standard can no longer remain. That does not make the other person evil. It simply reveals compatibility. A relationship built around your overfunctioning may struggle when you become balanced. A dynamic built around your constant explaining may feel strange when you become concise. A person who relied on your guilt may call your peace a personality change. Let the evidence speak. You do not need to turn them into enemies to honor what you learned. You only need to stop rewriting the lesson because somebody dislikes the consequence. That is maturity. And this is where heaven's celebration becomes commissioning. The celebration is not a graduation into permanent ease. It is recognition that you are ready to carry a different standard into the next rooms of your life. The assignment now is to protect what was formed without becoming rigid. Remain open. Remain compassionate. Remain teachable. But stop confusing openness with unrestricted access. Stop confusing compassion with responsibility for every reaction. Stop confusing humility with shrinking so nobody feels challenged by your growth. The new standard must remain alive when the new opportunities arrive, because they will test it in different clothing. The old cycle may have approached through conflict. The next test could approach through flattery. The old cycle may have pressured you through rejection. The next test could pressure you through opportunity. Discernment is not only needed when something looks bad. Sometimes it is needed most when something looks exactly like what you prayed for. That is why your receiver matters. That is why clarity matters. That is why peace must become more than a temporary feeling. Peace becomes a reference point. When something asks you to betray that reference point, you notice sooner. When something expands peace without requiring you to abandon wisdom, you notice that too. You stop asking only, "Do I want this?" You begin asking, "Who do I become while holding this?" That question will protect you in the season ahead. Chosen one, you have now received the answer you were promised. The hidden act has been named. The reason heaven celebrated has been revealed. The cycle did not break because everyone changed. It broke because you stopped changing yourself every time someone refused to understand you. That is the victory. Now, do not spend the next season staring at the closed gate. Turn around. There is space behind you that used to be occupied by noise. There is attention returning that used to be spent on explanation. There is discernment becoming easier to hear because fear is no longer speaking at the same volume. And there are things you will recognize from this clearer place that the former version of you could not have recognized. The celebration was not the ending. It was the signal that the next movement can finally begin. Chosen one, now that the old cycle has been named, there is something you need to understand about what comes after freedom. The first change is not always the one people expect. It may not be money, a relationship, an opportunity, or a dramatic sign arriving at your door. Very often, the first evidence is quieter. You begin to notice that your inner world is no longer crowded by the same emergencies. That can feel almost unsettling at first. You wake up and there is less to chase mentally. There is no urgent conversation demanding to be replayed, No imagined explanation waiting to be perfected. No emotional fire asking you to prove that you still care. The silence can feel unfamiliar because chaos once occupied so much space that its absence resembles emptiness. Do not misread that emptiness. The space left behind by a broken cycle is not a punishment. It is not evidence that you have been forgotten. It is cleared ground, and cleared ground can look barren before it becomes useful. Think about a room after everything unnecessary has been removed. At first, you notice what is missing. The familiar furniture is gone. The objects that once gave the room identity are no longer there. But only after the room becomes empty can you see how much space was always available. Your life is beginning to show you that space. The first aftermath of victory is often reduced noise. You may have fewer conversations than before. You may notice that some people no longer know how to approach you because the old version of access is gone. You may even wonder whether becoming healthier somehow made life smaller. It did not. You are simply discovering how much of your former activity was not movement. Some of it was repetition. Some of it was emotional maintenance. Some of it was managing connections that required constant repair because the foundation itself was unstable. When that activity disappears, the calendar may look quieter, while the soul becomes more available. This is the empty space reframe I need you to carry into the next season. Nothing is missing merely because something familiar is absent. Sometimes absence is evidence that the clearing worked. A field after harvest can look empty, but emptiness does not mean the field has no future. It means one cycle has finished using the soil. Rest becomes part of preparation. The ground does not panic because the previous crop is gone. Neither should you. Your old identity may try to fill the space immediately. It may tell you to find another person to rescue, another problem to solve, another emotional mystery to analyze, another complicated situation that makes you feel necessary. Be careful with that impulse. If struggle was part of your identity for a long time, ease can feel like irrelevance. If being needed made you feel secure, peace can feel like nobody cares. If chaos gave you a role, stability can make you wonder who you are without the role. That is not a sign that the old pattern was better. It is a sign that your identity is learning how to exist without crisis. This is where the chosen one must mature beyond survival. You are not here merely to become excellent at escaping difficult seasons. You are learning how to live when difficulty is no longer the center of your story. That may require a different kind of courage. There is courage in walking away from what harms you. But there is also courage in allowing something healthy to remain simple. There is courage in receiving help without suspicion. There is courage in accepting a peaceful opportunity without searching for the hidden trap. There is courage in believing that not every blessing must first arrive disguised as a battle. That is where recognition begins to shift. The former version of you often recognized what was familiar faster than what was aligned. You could identify emotional distance because you had studied it for years. You could detect inconsistency because your nervous system knew its rhythm. You could feel when someone was about to withdraw because you had learned to watch for it. But healthy consistency may have felt almost invisible because it did not activate the same alarms. Now the pattern is changing. You are beginning to notice what does not drain you. You are beginning to notice conversations after which you still feel like yourself. You are beginning to notice opportunities that do not demand immediate self-betrayal in exchange for access. You are learning to recognize peace as information. That is a profound shift. Before, intensity often felt important. Now, clarity is beginning to feel important. Before, The emotional charge around a situation could convince you that it must carry destiny. Now you are learning that some of the most aligned things arrive without needing to destabilize you first. The lack of chaos does not mean the lack of purpose. This is how clearing changes reception. The provision may not suddenly appear from nowhere. Sometimes the provision was already near you, but your attention was occupied elsewhere. A person may have been trustworthy for months, but you were still emotionally studying someone inconsistent. An opportunity may have been practical and aligned, but your mind was trapped inside a problem that had already revealed its answer. A creative idea may have been trying to form while your attention was being consumed by conversations that never needed another round. When the old cycle loses access, those quieter signals become easier to notice. That is the recognition shift. The world does not necessarily become more generous overnight. You become more available to what was previously drowned out. This is why the receiver language mattered earlier. A clear signal can be present while attention is elsewhere. A healthy connection can be present while your emotional system is still tracking the unhealthy one. A solution can be sitting inside a simple thought while the mind keeps searching for a complicated answer. Greater clarity does not create reality from nothing. It changes what you can recognize within reality. That distinction will protect you. You do not need to assign supernatural meaning to every coincidence. You do not need to treat every new person as destiny. You do not need to call every idea a divine instruction. Discernment becomes stronger when excitement no longer has permission to decide everything. You can notice, you can test, you can wait, you can observe what produces peace over time. The watchman is not passive. The watchman is patient enough to gather evidence. That patience will matter because the next season may bring things that resemble what you once prayed for. Not everything that resembles the promise belongs to the promise. A counterfeit can wear attractive clothing. An opportunity can flatter your identity while quietly violating your values. A relationship can say the right words while repeating the wrong pattern. Your new standard must be able to survive beautiful packaging. That is why heaven celebrated the internal victory before sending you forward. The old version of you was vulnerable to what looked desirable. The new version is learning to ask what something requires from you in order to keep it. If maintaining it requires you to abandon peace, ignore discernment, or return to constant proving, pay attention. The blessing does not need your self-betrayal in order to remain a blessing. This is where accelerated fulfillment becomes practical. You may begin making decisions faster, not because you are rushing, but because fewer false options remain convincing. You may close doors sooner because you no longer need months of additional evidence after the pattern has already become clear. You may recognize a healthy yes faster because you are no longer addicted to the emotional drama of uncertainty. That reduction in internal argument changes time. What once required weeks of overthinking may require one honest afternoon. What once required 6 conversations may become obvious after 1. What once required somebody else to validate may become settled through your own observation and prayer. The outer world may call that confidence. You will know it as restored trust in discernment. And something else begins to happen when attention returns. Creativity comes back. Ideas that once died under constant mental noise begin surviving long enough to develop. You find yourself thinking about what you want to build instead of only what you need to escape. That shift is one of the earliest signs that survival is no longer using all available energy. Pay attention when your imagination changes direction. For a long time, imagination may have been used to predict danger. You imagined arguments before they happened. You imagined rejection before anyone spoke. You imagined how everything could go wrong so you could prepare yourself emotionally. That is still imagination, but imagination operating under fear. As fear loses authority, imagination can return to creation. Now you imagine possibilities. You notice ways to improve your work. You think about a healthier home. You consider what life could become if peace remained the baseline instead of the reward at the end of exhaustion. The same mind that once rehearsed danger can begin rehearsing design. That is not fantasy, it is reclaimed capacity. And this is where I want to quietly bring back something from earlier. If you recognized yourself in the description of mental fragmentation, if years of divided attention made clarity feel harder to access, remember that support exists for the receiver as well as the life around it. You do not need to force yourself into greater clarity through another exhausting routine. The practical approach we discussed earlier was included for exactly that reason. Not to replace the inner work, not to create the identity, not to tell you what decisions to make, simply to support greater coordination while you learn to use reclaimed attention differently. Keep it in its proper place. A support is useful when it serves the person. It becomes dangerous when the person begins serving the support. Your authority stays with you. If that pathway felt relevant when we discussed it earlier, you already know where the information is. There is no need to turn this moment into another sales conversation. The more important question now is what you will do with the clarity you recover. Because clarity that is never acted upon becomes another form of delay. You can recognize the healthy door and still refuse to walk through it. You can see the old pattern and still romanticize it. You can feel peace and still abandon it because chaos offers a faster emotional reward. Recognition is powerful, but recognition must eventually become choice. That is why this season is asking for embodiment, not more declarations about being a cycle breaker, not more speeches about knowing your worth, not more explanations of what happened in the past. Embodiment means the new standard begins appearing in ordinary decisions. It appears in who receives your time. It appears in what you tolerate twice. It appears in whether you answer immediately because you want to or because anxiety demanded it. It appears in whether you rest without inventing guilt. It appears in whether your yes is clean and your no remains clean after someone dislikes it. Those decisions create the future more reliably than emotional intensity, and they create generational evidence. Someone watching you may never hear the full story. They may only notice that you do not panic when someone disagrees. They may notice that you apologize when you are wrong without apologizing for existing. They may notice that love in your life does not require fear to stay alive. That becomes instruction without a lecture. A child learns from atmosphere before language. A family learns what is normal by watching what repeats. A future partner learns what relationship means through what you consistently accept and consistently refuse. This is how generational legacy becomes tangible. You are not only breaking what hurt you, you are creating a different emotional normal. That may be one of the greatest forms of abundance you ever produce. Money matters. Opportunity matters. Relationships matter. But a household where people can speak truth without fearing abandonment is also wealth. A mind that can rest without expecting punishment is also wealth. A person who can receive love without needing to earn every ounce of it is also wealth. A future generation that does not inherit your old emotional prison is also wealth. Do not reduce fulfillment to what can be counted. Some breakthroughs change the atmosphere long before they change the numbers. Yet the numbers can change too. A clearer person handles opportunities differently. They notice unnecessary spending driven by emotion. They make decisions with less impulsive fear. They become more consistent because energy is not being consumed by avoidable drama. Practical stability often grows from emotional stability in ways that look ordinary while they are happening. The same applies to work. A person who is no longer mentally carrying 5 unresolved relationships into every workday has more attention available for the task in front of them. That attention can become skill. Skill can become better decisions. Better decisions can become opportunities that were impossible to see while survival occupied the entire field. This is not a promise that every problem disappears. It is an explanation of why clearing has consequences. And here is the future proof I want you to remember. The public evidence may come later than the internal decision. When it comes, do not mistake the later evidence for the beginning of the transformation. The beginning already happened. If a new door opens next month, the door did not create your courage. If a healthier person appears, that person did not create your boundary. If financial movement begins, money did not create your discipline. If recognition finally arrives, applause did not create your identity. Those things will be reflections of a process that began before anyone could see it. That is why you must remember this season correctly. Otherwise, when the visible reward arrives, you may accidentally give it credit for saving you. It did not save you. You became different before it arrived. That difference is why you can hold it differently when it comes. There will be a moment in the future when you look at something that once would have overwhelmed you and realize you are responding calmly. There will be a conversation where the old version of you would have over-explained, and the new version simply tells the truth once. There will be an opportunity where you would once have doubted yourself for weeks, and you will recognize alignment much sooner. Those moments will be the public echo of the private shift we have been naming. Do not be surprised when they happen. Do not call yourself lucky simply because the timing looks sudden. The outer manifestation may feel sudden to people who did not watch the preparation. You will know how long the roots were growing. This is the strange thing about accelerated fulfillment. From the outside, it can look as if everything changed at once. One connection leads to another. One clean decision creates 3 new possibilities. One boundary returns hours of attention every week. One period of focused work creates an outcome that scattered effort could not produce. But the acceleration was prepared by the clearing. You remove drag. That is why movement feels different. You are not becoming reckless. You are becoming less divided. There is a difference between speed created by panic and speed created by alignment. Panic runs because it fears losing something. Alignment moves because the direction is clear. Learn the feeling of those 2 states. Panic narrows the world. Alignment clarifies it. Panic says, decide now or everything disappears. Alignment can move quickly while remaining internally quiet. The body often knows the difference before the mind creates language for it. This will help you recognize what belongs in the space that clearing created. Do not rush to fill every gap. Some space is supposed to remain space. Some evenings are allowed to be uneventful. Some relationships are allowed to develop slowly. Some opportunities are allowed to be examined before they are accepted. Freedom includes the right not to turn every open space into another obligation. You spent too long believing your value depended on usefulness. Now learn the value of presence. Sit in a room without solving it. Listen to someone without absorbing them. Rest without converting the rest into preparation for more work. Let your mind experience what it means to exist without being assigned to an emergency. At first, this can feel almost irresponsible. That is because the old pattern trained you to confuse tension with responsibility. But responsibility is not measured by how much tension you can maintain. Responsibility is measured by whether you respond wisely to what is actually yours. This is another way the watchman identity matures. The immature watchman reacts to every sound. The mature watchman knows which sound requires action. The immature cycle breaker spends all their energy fighting the past. The mature cycle breaker builds something the past cannot reproduce. The mature chosen one stops using pain as the primary evidence of purpose. You are entering that stage now. The question is no longer only, what did you escape? The question becomes, what will you create from the freedom? Who will you become when the battle is not the central event? What kind of work will emerge from a clearer mind? What kind of love will you accept when inconsistency no longer feels magnetic? What kind of legacy becomes possible when peace is treated as a foundation rather than a temporary reward? Those questions are not pressure. They are invitations. You do not have to answer all of them today. The new season does not require another frantic plan. It requires availability, available attention, available discernment, available courage, available space. The very things the old cycle consumed are becoming resources again. That is why the quiet matters. It is not the pause before you return to chaos. It is the environment in which something different can finally grow. And when the visible proof begins arriving, remember what came first. The door will only confirm a person who already learned not to stand forever outside closed ones. The healthy relationship will only reveal the value of the standard you already chose. The clearer opportunity will only expose how much attention was returned when you stopped feeding confusion. The external blessing will not create the new identity. It will meet it. Chosen one, you are not standing in an empty life. You are standing in newly available space. The old noise is fading. The receiver is becoming easier to hear. The patterns that once stole hours of thought no longer have the same permission. And what comes next will show whether you can protect this peace while allowing new provision to enter it. That is the next test, not whether you can survive another betrayal, not whether you can endure another delay. Whether you can receive something good without recreating the old struggle around it, because some people know how to survive pain better than they know how to receive peace. You are being taught the second skill now, and it may change more than anything you have survived so far. Chosen one, you have reached the place where freedom must become inheritance. Breaking the cycle was never meant to end with you feeling lighter for a few days. The deeper purpose is that what once governed your family line, your relationships, your reactions, and your sense of worth no longer receives automatic permission to travel through you into what comes next. This is where the identity of the cycle breaker expands. At first, you thought the assignment was simply to escape what hurt you. Then you realized the greater work was learning not to recreate it. Now you are entering the final layer, building a way of living so different that the people who come after you do not have to fight the same battle in the same way. That is generational legacy. It does not always begin with wealth, property, a famous name, or something dramatic that can be passed down on paper. Sometimes legacy begins with the first home, where love no longer requires fear. It begins with the first relationship where disagreement does not automatically become punishment. It begins with one person deciding that guilt will no longer be the language used to keep connection alive. That person can be you. Think about how powerful that is. You may have spent years believing your private decisions affected only your private life. Yet every standard you normalize becomes part of the atmosphere around you. People learn from what you repeatedly accept, what you repeatedly refuse, and what you no longer treat as normal. A child can learn that boundaries and love can exist in the same room because they watched you practice both. A future partner can learn that honesty does not have to become warfare because you stopped using fear as a weapon. A friend can learn that silence is not abandonment because your silence no longer carries punishment. The transformation becomes larger than the original wound. This is why your victory was never merely personal. The old pattern wanted to convince you that your only choices were repeating it or becoming bitter against it. But the restorer finds a third way. You neither worship the past nor spend your future fighting it. You build something healthier until the old pattern loses relevance. That is a higher form of victory. There is a point where constantly speaking about what hurt you keeps the wound at the center of your identity. There is also a point where refusing to acknowledge the wound keeps it hidden and powerful. Restoration does neither. Restoration tells the truth, learns the lesson, changes the standard, and then begins building beyond the injury. You are approaching that point now. Notice how far you have already come through this message. You stayed long enough to move beyond the surface promise of being celebrated. You stayed through the uncomfortable part where the real victory was revealed as an internal decision rather than an external reward. You stayed when the message stopped flattering the old version of you and began asking whether you were ready to live differently. That matters. Not because watching a message makes you more spiritual than anyone else. It matters because sustained attention reflects the same quality you have been learning throughout this season. You are becoming less willing to run from a truth merely because it asks something of you. The former version of you may have wanted only confirmation. The emerging version can handle transformation. That difference is enormous. Confirmation says, "Tell me that everything I feel is correct." Transformation says, "Show me where my own habits must change so the next season does not inherit the same problem." One protects the ego, the other protects the future. Chosen one, your future needs the second one. The next generation does not need a perfect version of you. It does not need someone who never gets tired, never makes mistakes, and always knows what to do. It needs someone willing to repair what they recognize instead of pretending the pattern is harmless. That is how a family line changes. One person becomes willing to apologize without collapsing into shame. One person becomes willing to say no without creating a war. One person stops using silence as punishment. One person stops chasing people who withdraw affection to create control. One person decides that peace deserves to become ordinary. Then the emotional atmosphere changes. The people around that person begin adapting to a new standard. Some adapt beautifully, some resist, some disappear because the old arrangement was the only arrangement they knew how to participate in. But over time, the new standard becomes less unusual. That is how legacy is built. Not through one dramatic declaration, through repetition. You repeat peace until peace feels normal. You repeat honest communication until manipulation feels strange. You repeat clean boundaries until guilt no longer has the same persuasive power. You repeat respect until chaos no longer qualifies as passion. This is sacred work because repetition created many of the patterns you inherited, and repetition will help create the patterns that replace them. Do not underestimate ordinary days. The future can change through a Tuesday evening when you refuse to continue a conversation that has become disrespectful. It can change through a morning when you rest instead of proving your value through exhaustion. It can change through the moment you tell the truth calmly instead of swallowing it for another decade. Heaven sees those moments because those moments become structure. And here is the generational escalation you need to understand. You are no longer merely breaking a cycle so that you can feel free. You are becoming the person who establishes what freedom looks like after the cycle is broken. There is a difference. A breaker knows what must stop. A restorer knows what must be built in its place. A watchman recognizes what should not enter. A mature watchman also recognizes what deserves to be welcomed. Your assignment is moving from protection into construction. That construction begins with your internal world. What are you going to normalize inside yourself now that chaos no longer has the same authority? Will rest remain suspicious, or will you allow rest to become part of strength? Will healthy affection feel too quiet? Or will you learn to recognize consistency as safety? Will success trigger guilt, or will you allow provision to exist without apologizing for receiving it? These questions matter because the next season will expose whatever standard you carry forward. The old battle taught you how to detect danger. The new season must teach you how to recognize goodness. Those are not the same skill. Some people remain so trained for betrayal that they cannot relax when trustworthiness arrives. They investigate every kind gesture. They prepare for abandonment inside every peaceful relationship. They interpret stability as the calm before disaster. Their body leaves the old environment, but their expectation keeps recreating it. You are being invited beyond that. You do not need to become naive. Discernment remains. Wisdom remains. Boundaries remain. But hypervigilance does not need to remain in command. You can observe without assuming the worst. You can receive without immediately searching for the hidden cost. You can enjoy a good moment without demanding proof that it will last forever. This is part of learning to live after survival. And this is where the final unresolved consequence becomes important. Who will meet this new version of you first? Not who will come back from the past. Not who will finally regret losing access. Who will encounter the version of you that no longer needs to perform the old role. It may be someone already in your life. A person who has been waiting for you to stop approaching every disagreement as a possible ending. A friend who has always respected you, but could never reach you through the walls you built around old disappointments. A family member who notices that your peace no longer depends on controlling their choices. Or it may be someone you have not met yet. Someone who will never know the version of you that chased mixed signals. Someone who will meet you after the internal courtroom has closed. Someone who will experience your boundaries as clarity rather than punishment, because you are no longer using them to communicate unresolved pain. They may receive the fruit of battles they never witnessed. That is one of the strange gifts of healing. The people who benefit from it are not always the people who cause the wound. And that is okay. Your restoration does not owe its fruit to the place where the injury began. You do not have to return to old ground simply because you finally learned how to grow. Some lessons are meant to be carried forward, not carried back. Many, too. This is where vindication becomes less important. The old version of you wanted the people from the painful chapter to witness the transformation. You imagined them seeing your peace, your success, your healthier relationships, your confidence, and finally understanding what they misjudged. But true freedom eventually asks a harder question. Would the new life still be enough if they never saw it? If the answer becomes yes, another chain breaks. You stop building the future as evidence in an old trial. You stop using happiness to make a point. You stop turning abundance into a message for people who are no longer responsible for interpreting your life. Your blessing becomes yours. Instead of becoming a performance directed backward, that is maturity. That is also why heaven's celebration can become quiet again now. The message began with celebration because you needed to know that your hidden choice mattered. Now, the celebration becomes commissioning. The question is no longer whether heaven saw what happened. The question is what you will do with what has been restored. Will you protect peace without idolizing isolation? Will you use discernment without becoming suspicious of everyone? Will you honor boundaries without turning them into walls nobody can cross? Will you remain soft enough to love and strong enough not to disappear inside love? Those are the questions of the restorer. A cycle breaker can become so focused on what must never happen again that life becomes defined by avoidance. A restorer asks a larger question. What deserves to happen now? What deserves your attention? What deserves your loyalty? What deserves your creativity? What deserves your yes? Healing is incomplete if every decision is still organized around what you are afraid to repeat. Eventually, life must become organized around what you are willing to create. That is where purpose returns. You begin building because you want to build, not merely because you are trying to prove that pain did not defeat you. You begin loving because love is meaningful, not because you are trying to repair an old rejection through a new person. You begin succeeding because the assignment deserves your gifts, not because success is needed to silence old critics. The motivation changes. And when motivation changes, the atmosphere changes with it. This is the shift from survival into stewardship. You are no longer asking only, how do I protect myself? You begin asking, what has been placed in my hands now that I can see more clearly? What relationships deserve cultivation? What work deserves concentration? What gifts deserve discipline? That question can lead to practical change. Perhaps you begin giving focused time to an idea you postponed for years. Perhaps you become more careful about sleep, rest, or the environment where you spend your attention. Perhaps you finally finish something because the emotional noise that kept interrupting you has begun to fade. Restoration becomes visible through ordinary consistency. Do not despise that consistency because it lacks drama. Drama kept many old patterns alive. Consistency is what builds what drama could never sustain. A healthy future is often repetitive in beautiful ways. You wake up without fear, controlling the first thought. You speak honestly. You work. You rest. You keep promises that belong to you and release obligations that do not. You love people without managing their entire emotional universe. There is power in an ordinary life that no longer requires chaos to feel meaningful. That may be the miracle you were not expecting. You were waiting for something spectacular enough to prove that heaven celebrated you. But perhaps part of the celebration is that ordinary peace is finally becoming available, and ordinary peace can become extraordinary legacy. Imagine someone growing up around you and never learning that screaming is the normal language of conflict. Imagine them never learning that love must be earned through self-abandonment. Imagine them watching you change your mind without shame, apologize without humiliation, and enforce a boundary without hatred. What you had to learn through pain could become their starting point. That is how one life bends a line. You may never see every consequence. Generational legacy often reaches farther than the person who begins it can measure. A choice made today can change the emotional vocabulary of people you will never meet. That is why your hidden victory mattered so much. It was not only about one message you did not send. It was not only about one relationship you stopped chasing. It was not only about one boundary that remained standing. It was evidence that a different pattern had become possible. Now, protect the possibility through practice. When guilt returns, notice it without obeying it. When nostalgia edits the past, remember the full story. When loneliness whispers that any connection is better than peaceful solitude, do not let urgency rewrite your standard. When something healthy arrives, do not punish it for what something unhealthy did before. That last one matters deeply. The next person should not have to pay the emotional debt created by the previous person. The next opportunity should not have to overcome every fear created by the last disappointment. The next season should not have to prove itself innocent before you allow yourself to participate. Discernment examines the present accurately. Trauma from the old cycle can tempt you to put the present on trial for the past. You are learning the difference. This is where restoration becomes responsibility. Freedom gives you options. Maturity chooses among them with wisdom. You are allowed to move slowly without remaining frozen. You are allowed to ask questions without assuming betrayal. You are allowed to test consistency without sabotaging it. You are allowed to receive love while still keeping your eyes open. There is a middle ground between blindness and suspicion. That middle ground is where healthy trust grows. Chosen one, notice what this means for the title that brought you here. You finally did it. Heaven celebrated. God smiled. You won. But the victory did not turn you into someone who never faces another difficult decision. It turned you into someone who now has evidence that a different decision is possible. You know what it feels like to let peace win. You know what it feels like to survive being misunderstood. You know what it feels like to keep the gate closed when the old pattern knocks. That memory becomes strength when another test arrives. Not every future test will look like the previous one. The next challenge may not be rejection. It may be success. It may be attention. It may be a relationship that actually treats you well. It may be an opportunity large enough to awaken the old fear that you are not ready. This is why identity must remain stable. Do not sabotage a healthy blessing merely because struggle was easier to recognize. Do not become suspicious of open doors just because you spent years learning how to survive closed ones. Let discernment evaluate what is actually present, and do not force prophecy onto every event. You are not required to know exactly what happens next. You are required to remain aligned with what you have already learned. One clear step is enough until the next step becomes visible. That protects you from creating another form of pressure. Spiritual maturity is not constant certainty about every detail. Sometimes it is enough to know what you will no longer violate inside yourself. You may not know who is coming. You may not know which opportunity opens first. You may not know what visible evidence arrives next. But you know the standard that must meet it. Peace without self-abandonment. Love without manipulation. Purpose without proving. Provision without shame. Discernment without fear. That is enough to move forward. Now we are approaching the ritual threshold. Not a performance. Not superstition. Not an attempt to force heaven into giving you something. A declaration is simply a way of bringing language into agreement with the standard you have spent this message uncovering. Before that final seal, there is one thing I want you to understand. Words cannot replace decisions. You can declare peace and still choose chaos tomorrow. You can declare boundaries and reopen every gate out of guilt. You can declare freedom while secretly waiting for the old person to return and make the old story feel complete. The declaration matters when it names what your life is prepared to practice. That is why we did not begin with it. We had to move through diagnosis. We had to uncover the pattern. We had to name the hidden victory. We had to understand what clearing creates. Only then can the final words carry meaning, rather than becoming another emotional moment that fades by morning. So, prepare for the seal by becoming quiet inside. You do not need to force an emotion. You do not need tears to prove sincerity. You do not need to feel electricity, warmth, pressure, or any particular sensation. The truth of a decision is not measured by dramatic physical feedback. Simply notice what you now know. You know that being misunderstood does not require self-betrayal. You know that another person's discomfort does not automatically become your assignment. You know that peace can remain even when closure does not arrive from outside. You know that the cycle cannot continue in the same way without your participation. That is enough. And there is one quiet tension I want to leave with you before the seal. The final test is not whether you can receive more. The final test is whether you can refuse to reopen what has already been closed simply because the new space feels unfamiliar. That is where many breakthroughs leak away. The door closes. The person experiences relief. Then loneliness arrives. Memory softens the painful details. The mind starts remembering the best moments while removing the cost. Soon, the closed door begins looking like an unfinished opportunity. Be careful. Not every urge to revisit something is divine instruction. Sometimes it is simply familiarity asking to be fed again. You can honor the lesson without reopening the classroom. You can forgive without restoring access. You can remember without returning. You can wish someone well without making them responsible for your future again. This is how peace stays protected without bitterness. The seal we are approaching will not be a curse against the past. It will not be a declaration against another person. It will not ask heaven to punish anyone who misunderstood you. Your freedom does not require another person's destruction. The seal will be about your own agreement, your agreement to remain aligned, your agreement to carry peace forward, your agreement to build what the old pattern never taught you how to build. Your agreement to become a restorer rather than remaining only a survivor. That is the final movement. And when you speak those words, remember who they are for. They are not for the person who hurt you. They are not for the audience. They are not for people who doubted you. They are for the version of you that once believed returning was the only way to stop the ache. That version deserves to hear that the future has another option. Chosen one, you do not have to return. You do not have to prove. You do not have to chase. You do not have to shrink. You do not have to turn peace into guilt simply because peace was unfamiliar in the environment that formed you. The cycle has taught you everything it was allowed to teach. Now the lesson can remain while the cycle ends. And what comes after can be built from another standard. Chosen one, this is where the message becomes quiet again. You have already seen the pattern, named the hidden victory, and understood why heaven celebrated before the visible world had anything to applaud. Now the work is not to create another battle. The work is to protect what has already been won without turning protection into fear. That distinction matters. Victory does not mean you must wake up every morning searching for the next enemy. It does not mean every difficult person becomes a spiritual threat. It does not mean every closed door must be analyzed for hidden meaning. Sometimes victory looks like finally becoming calm enough to stop making conflict the center of your attention. You have spent enough time learning how to survive. Now you are learning how to remain peaceful without feeling guilty for it. You are learning how to walk forward without checking behind you every few steps. You are learning how to let a lesson remain complete. That is a different kind of strength. The former version of you thought strength meant enduring more. The emerging version understands that strength can also mean refusing unnecessary pain. The former version thought loyalty meant staying available no matter what happened. The emerging version understands that loyalty without discernment becomes self-abandonment. The former version thought peace had to be earned after exhaustion. The emerging version is beginning to treat peace as a standard. That is the final distinction. You do not protect victory by continuing the war forever. You protect victory by refusing to become the person the old war required you to be. You do not need constant tension to prove that the lesson mattered. Let that settle. A healed person does not spend every day proving that the wound existed. A cycle breaker does not spend every day standing beside the broken chain. A restorer eventually turns away from the chain and begins building something. That is where your identity is moving now. Chosen one, cycle breaker, watchman, restorer. These are not costumes you wear to feel superior to other people. They describe stages of responsibility. The chosen one notices the call. The cycle breaker interrupts what should not continue. The watchman learns what deserves access. The restorer builds what should exist in the empty space. The final identity is not about being more important. It is about becoming more responsible for what you create next. So before we speak the seal, let your mind become still. You do not need to force emotion. You do not need to manufacture a sign. You do not need to prove that this moment is sacred by feeling something dramatic. Simply become honest. Bring to mind the old pattern without reopening it. See the version of you who used to explain until exhausted. See the version of you who confused being needed with being loved. See the version of you who believed another person's misunderstanding could erase your truth. Do not judge that person. That person was trying to survive with the tools available at the time. Now imagine standing beside that former version of yourself. Not above them, not against them, beside them. You do not need to shame the person who carried you this far. You only need to let them know they are no longer responsible for protecting the future. That job belongs to the person you have become. And now, if these words agree with what you are choosing, let them become your declaration. I release the need to be understood by everyone. I release the belief that another person's discomfort automatically becomes my responsibility. I release the habit of abandoning my own clarity simply to keep temporary peace. I release the old agreement that connection must be purchased with self-betrayal. I choose peace without apology. I choose discernment without fear. I choose compassion without surrendering every boundary. I choose love without disappearing inside it. I choose honesty without turning honesty into warfare. I choose to let closed seasons remain closed. I choose to remember the lesson without living inside the wound. I choose to forgive without pretending that wisdom has learned nothing. I choose to carry the truth forward instead of carrying the conflict forward. I do not need the old person to return in order for my story to be complete. I do not need the old opportunity to reopen in order to prove that I was worthy. I do not need an apology in order to honor what I learned. I do not need public vindication in order to trust private transformation. I allow another person to have their interpretation. I allow myself to have peace. I allow the future to be different without demanding that the past explain itself first. I release the courtroom. I release the argument. I release the imaginary conversation. I release the sentence I kept hoping someone else would finally say. I will not keep my future waiting for words that may never come. I bless what taught me. I release what cannot travel with me. I protect what has been restored. I remain open to what is healthy. I remain willing to learn. I remain willing to change. I remain willing to receive without recreating the conditions that once made receiving difficult. I will not mistake chaos for passion. I will not mistake inconsistency for mystery. I will not mistake guilt for love. I will not mistake exhaustion for purpose. I will not mistake being needed for being valued. I will pay attention to what produces clarity over time. I will notice what allows me to remain myself. I will notice where respect is mutual. I will notice where peace grows instead of shrinking. I will let consistency become attractive. I will let kindness be simple. I will let good things arrive without interrogating them for crimes committed by the past. I will let the present prove what the present is. I will not make the future pay the debt of yesterday. I choose to become the kind of person who can receive a blessing without turning it into another test. I choose to become the kind of person who can hold opportunity without using opportunity to prove worth. I choose to become the kind of person who can love deeply without abandoning discernment. I choose to become the kind of person who can rest without apologizing for being alive. I release the identity that needed struggle to feel important. I release the habit of searching for danger inside every peaceful moment. I release the belief that something good must become difficult before it becomes legitimate. I allow goodness to be good. I allow peace to be peaceful. I allow clarity to be enough. I allow one clean answer to remain one clean answer without creating 10 more questions around it. I trust myself to notice when something changes. I trust myself to ask for help when I need help. I trust myself to reconsider without treating reconsideration as failure. I trust myself to leave without hatred when leaving becomes wise. I trust myself to stay when staying is healthy. I am not required to know every detail of what happens next. I am required only to remain honest with the next clear step. I do not need to predict the whole path. I do not need to control every outcome. I can move with wisdom, one decision at a time. I will protect my attention. I will protect my time. I will protect the environments that help my mind remain clear. I will protect the relationships where truth can be spoken without punishment. I will not call that selfishness. I will call it stewardship. I will remember that my attention is a resource. I will remember that every open channel carries a cost. I will remember that discernment includes deciding what does not deserve continued analysis. I will let some questions remain unanswered. I will let some people remain misunderstood by me. I will let some people misunderstand me. I will let truth survive without constant defense. I will stop confusing explanation with safety. I declare that the cycle does not continue through automatic reaction. I declare that the old pattern no longer receives obedience merely because it feels familiar. I declare that guilt does not make decisions for me. I declare that fear does not receive the final vote. I declare that peace is allowed to remain even when someone else disagrees. I declare that the next generation does not need to inherit every emotional rule I inherited. They do not need to learn that love means walking on eggshells. They do not need to learn that conflict means abandonment. They do not need to learn that silence must always be chaste. They do not need to learn that worth is measured by usefulness. Through what I practice, I can help create another normal. A normal where apology does not require humiliation. A normal where boundaries do not require hatred. A normal where affection does not have to be earned through anxiety. A normal where people can disagree and still remain safe. A normal where rest is not treated as laziness. A normal where success does not create shame. A normal where receiving does not create guilt. A normal where clarity is respected. That is the legacy I choose to build. And now, chosen one, notice what has happened to the language. At the beginning of this message, you were looking backward, trying to understand what heaven had celebrated. Now your words are facing forward. That is how you know the message has completed its first assignment. You are no longer asking only what happened to me. You are asking, what will I build from what I learned? You are no longer asking only who misunderstood me. You are asking, who am I becoming? You are no longer asking only what was taken. You are asking what has become available again. That is restoration. There will still be difficult days. There will still be moments when an old response feels tempting. There will still be situations where you question whether your standard is too high or your boundary is too firm. Growth does not erase uncertainty. It changes what you do when uncertainty arrives. You pause. You observe. You do not immediately hand fear the microphone. You gather evidence. You return to what has proven peaceful and wise over time. Then you choose. That rhythm is enough. You do not need perfect discernment in order to live differently. You need enough humility to notice, enough courage to choose, and enough patience to correct course when necessary. That is mature authority. Authority does not mean never being wrong. Authority means you stop surrendering your entire direction because you fear being wrong. And there is something else I want to seal before we move into the final blessing. You are allowed to become unfamiliar to people who only knew you through the role you played for them. You are allowed to be quieter. You are allowed to answer later. You are allowed to say, I need time. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to stop explaining a decision after the explanation has already been given. You are allowed to be kind without becoming endlessly available. You are allowed to protect what was expensive to learn. This is not rebellion. It is responsibility. The restorer cannot build anything stable while every old voice retains emergency access. The gate must work. And now, I want to speak the blessing over the work that follows. May your peace become more familiar than chaos. May your clarity become easier to recognize than urgency. May your discernment become quieter and stronger, less interested in drama and more interested in truth. May the relationships meant for your next season recognize the version of you that no longer needs to perform for love. May you become comfortable with consistency. May you become comfortable with honest affection. May you become comfortable with opportunities that do not require self-betrayal. May you become comfortable with receiving. May your mind learn that safety does not have to be temporary. May your work benefit from the attention returning to you. May ideas stay in your mind long enough to become plans. May plans stay long enough to become action. May action become something useful for people beyond you. May the energy once spent rehearsing conflict become available for creation. May your home carry less tension. May your conversations require less performance. May the people around you feel that truth can exist without punishment. May the next generation inherit more permission than fear. May what you learned through struggle become wisdom they can begin with. And when visible provision begins appearing, may you recognize it without worshipping it. When money changes, may money remain a tool. When opportunity expands, may opportunity remain an assignment. When relationships deepen, may relationship remain partnership rather than identity. When recognition comes, may recognition remain information rather than proof of worth. You already learned the danger of allowing the outside world to define the inside. Do not rebuild that system simply because the outside world becomes kinder. Keep the source of your identity deeper than applause. This is where the celebration becomes commissioning. Heaven celebrated because the cycle lost authority. Now the assignment is to live as though that is true. Not for one emotional night, not until the next difficult message arrives, not only when everyone agrees with you. Live it in ordinary choices. Live it when nobody is watching. Live it when the old pattern approaches politely instead of aggressively. Live it when the new opportunity looks exciting enough to make discernment feel inconvenient. Carry the standard with you. That is how celebration becomes legacy. And now there is one practical thread from earlier that must be closed properly. We spoke about the receiver. We spoke about fragmented attention, mental fog, and the possibility of supporting greater coordination instead of simply forcing more effort. If that part of the message described something real in your life, the support we discussed remains available for you to evaluate. The genius switch is the 8-minute auditory protocol described earlier around neural sync technology and whole brain activation. The current product page described in the material presents it at $39 with 4 included bonuses and a money-back guarantee. The details are available through the link in the description and the pinned comment. Read the details for yourself. Consider whether the mechanism speaks to the problem you actually have. Consider the guarantee. Consider whether you want another tool at all. The decision should come from clarity, not fear. A tool is useful only if it serves the life you are building. It does not create the calling. It does not create the boundary. It does not create your worth. It does not replace prayer, wisdom, medical care, or your own responsibility. It supports the receiver if you decide that support belongs in your process. That is the last time it will be mentioned. Now, return your attention to what cannot be purchased. The choice, the standard, the peace, the future you are building through repetition. Those remain yours. And this is the quiet finality I promised you. You do not have anything left to prove to the chapter that already ended. You do not have to send one final message. You do not have to create one final explanation. You do not have to stage one final moment where everyone sees that you were right. The chapter does not require an audience in order to close. Let it close. Let the room become quiet. Let the old characters leave the stage if they need to leave. Let the unanswered questions remain where they are. You are allowed to carry the lesson without carrying every loose end. You won, not because another person lost, not because every circumstance has changed, not because pain will never visit again. You won because pain no longer receives automatic authority over who you become next. You won because misunderstanding no longer automatically makes you abandon your truth. You won because connection no longer has to be purchased with self-betrayal. You won because peace remained standing when the old pattern asked you to leave it. That is why heaven celebrated, and God smiled because the quiet decision revealed something no speech could prove. You had become capable of choosing differently. That is what preparation was for. That is what the silence was forming. That is what the delay was exposing. Not a perfect person, a freer person. Now, walk as that person. Do not walk backward to show the old room how much you changed. Walk forward because there are rooms that have never met the old version of you. There are people who will know you first as peaceful. There are opportunities that will meet you after the confusion. There are decisions you will make from a mind that is less crowded than before. There are ordinary mornings waiting for you that do not need to become battles. There are ordinary evenings where nothing goes wrong, and you finally learn not to be suspicious of that. Receive those moments. They are part of the new chapter 2. Not every miracle announces itself. Sometimes the miracle is that your phone is quiet and your mind is quieter. Sometimes the miracle is that someone treats you well and you do not search for the hidden betrayal. Sometimes the miracle is finishing your work because your attention stayed where your body was. Sometimes the miracle is hearing no and remaining whole. Sometimes the miracle is saying no and still feeling love in your heart. That is restoration in ordinary clothes. And ordinary restoration is strong enough to change generations. Do not despise it because it does not look dramatic. Let heaven have the celebration. You take the next step. Let heaven remember every invisible moment. You build the visible life. Let God hold what you cannot control. You become responsible for what has been placed in your hands. That is enough. Chosen one, you finally did it. The cycle reached for you and did not receive the old response. The old identity asked you to return and you remained where peace had brought you. The need to be understood rose one more time, and it did not become your master. Something ended, something opened, and you do not need to force the next chapter to arrive faster than it is ready. You only need to stop reopening the chapter that has already taught you what it came to teach. Stay teachable. Stay discerning, stay gentle, stay clear, stay willing to receive what is healthy without apologizing for it. Stay willing to release what cannot meet the standard without turning release into hatred. You are not returning to the old role. You are not required to become the old rescuer. You are not required to carry every person's reaction. You are not required to make your growth comfortable for everyone who benefited from your exhaustion. You are allowed to become peaceful. You are allowed to become focused. You are allowed to become available for your own life. That may be the most important door opening now, not a door somewhere outside you. The door into a life where your attention is finally present for what matters. Walk through that one first. And if tomorrow looks ordinary, do not think the message failed. Make the ordinary decision differently. Protect your morning. Tell the truth cleanly. Do your work with the attention you have. Rest when rest is needed. Answer what deserves an answer. Release what does not. That is how the new chapter becomes real. One ordinary decision at a time. One peaceful response at a time. One clean boundary at a time. One healthy relationship at a time. One generation at a time. You have nothing left to prove to the season behind you, but you have much to